To start, let me explain myself. I'm 5'7", 113 pounds, and I was 16 at the time of the encounter. I'm a multi-sport athlete: track, handball, volleyball, basketball, and hockey, and I have insomnia. This all happened around 2 a.m. on August 10th of 2019. I had been over to my best friend's place because she had just returned home from a vacation, and she had birthday presents for me. Hoodies and gummies, if you're curious. I had spent almost an hour there already, and wanted to head back home soon because honestly, my town is scary at night. Drug dealers, rapists, murderers. You know the deal. So, I waved goodbye to my best friend and started walking down her street. I guess a party had just let up, because behind me at the end of the road, about 20 or 30 yards from where I was standing, there were a couple of men walking across the crosswalk. They were both pretty tall. I'm guessing between 5'11" and 6'3". The two seemed harmless at first when I looked in their direction, but soon they came to a stop. They were both looking at me. At this point, I felt uncomfortable, so I just kept walking. That's when I overheard one of them say, "Hey, that's a girl." At this, I whipped my head around. They were starting to walk in my direction now, and one of the two men had moved over towards the sidewalk, where there was no light. I knew at this point that something wasn't right, and I began to pick up my pace. They were still getting closer. I didn't know where the second guy was, but when I looked back, the first guy was still following me down the middle of the road. I think that they were planning to cut me off and try to trap me between the two of them. The minute I was about 13 yards from the T intersection, I started to run, and that's when the yelling started. "Oh great, now she's running!" I hooked a sharp right, and then a left. I could still hear them behind me, and at this point, all I knew was that I couldn't stop moving. I had to lose them somehow. I was coming up to an apartment building with a small parking lot behind it. There were no lights. I made the split-second decision to veer off into the parking lot, and I squeezed myself under one of the cars. I don't know how long I waited there. It could have been a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. I watched the two men run past. They didn't bother to check under the cars, which was definitely in my favor. The minute I felt I was safe, I backtracked and took a different route back to my home. I was too scared to take the main route, in the fear I would have bumped into them. I know what I'm about to say is stupid, but I didn't go to the police. I wouldn't have been able to give them a proper description of the men, because I hadn't seen their faces. If there's anything I learned from my experience, it's that no matter who you are, you need to be extremely careful. You can think that the part of town or city that you live in is safe, but that really isn't the case. There is no protective barrier to keep out people with bad intentions. Please, whatever you do, watch your surroundings as if your life depends on it. If I had been listening to my music and not paying attention, I hate to think what could have happened to me. I hope that no one else has to experience the fear that I did. It was almost like prey being chased by predators. And to the men who followed me, let's never meet again.
Last year, I went to attend a Halloween party at one of my college friends' farmhouse. My friend Jack asked his parents to let us have their old farmhouse for a night for the party. We were all a bunch of basketball players, hence, the party was all about booze and silly jokes. At least, that's what I expected. Jack's father inherited this farmhouse from his father and kept it for weekend getaways. The farmhouse was 40 minutes drive from our college campus. We all decided to meet there with our backpacks at 5 p.m. sharp. I have always been a responsible adult, hence, my father didn't deny to lend me his car for this one night. We were 6 guys, including me and Jack. We hopped into the car, and Jack sat beside me to help me with the directions. After leaving the town area, we took a dusty road. The road continued between the forest. When we reached the farmhouse, it was almost 6 p.m. as we stopped near a store to get enough booze and snacks. It was a 2-story wooden house with a lake behind it. The area was secluded. I didn't see a single house throughout the entire journey. Everyone got quite excited. We started the preparations for the party. We brought a lot of spooky stuff for decorations. Fake cobwebs, crafted pumpkin face, candlelights, etc. Around 6:45, we finished the entire decoration and lit the candlelights and the fireplace. The house was looking dark and perfectly Halloween themed. We decided to keep the party downstairs to make less mess around the house. We put up some rock music and started to drink beer as everyone was cracking boys' jokes. The downstairs area had a broad dining space where we were all partying and a bathroom in the left corner. I noticed a big oil painting above the fireplace. It was a family painting. I could identify Jack's parents. They were standing with an old couple, which I think was Jack's grandparents, and with a woman sitting beside on a chair. She was wearing a silver bracelet on her hand. Her face appeared pale and she seemed sad. It felt like she wasn't interested to pose for the picture, but due to the family's sake, she just sat there. Seeing me looking at the picture, Jack said to me, "This picture was being painted right after my parents got married and came to visit my grandparents." I asked him, "Who is that woman in the painting?" Jack said, "That is my aunt. She went missing before I was born. My father said that Grandpa was the local sheriff in those days. He searched the entire area many times but couldn't find her. Local people said that she ran away with her high school boyfriend, but Grandpa kept saying that she is in trouble. My father said Grandpa left this house ever since and never came back. He got a bit hysteric on his last days before death, saying he heard my aunt's voice many times inside this house." The atmosphere got a bit eerie as Jack finished his family story. One of our friends came to us and said, "Guys, let's enjoy this party. We have lots of booze to finish before dawn." Eventually, Jack and I joined the party and forgot all about this. Everyone was drinking like a maniac and the music started to get louder. The place was so deserted that we didn't have to worry about complaining neighbors. Around 12 p.m., all of us were drunk as hell and we realized we were out of beers. I told my friends, I am done with drinking for tonight. Also, I didn't want to drive in the morning with a terrible hangover, so I surrendered. But my friends wanted to drink more. Just when I was thinking how risky it will be to drive to that faraway store amidst the forest, Jack went upstairs and got an old worn-out key from his father's room. Everyone asked him what is he doing with an old rusty key. Jack said they had a wine cellar in the basement and some of its collections can be there still. As I was the sober one in comparison to others, I decided to go down to the cellar to grab a bottle of wine. The basement entrance was at the back of the house. I came outside with a flashlight and started to walk. It was quite chilly and the moon was showering pale silver light. The lake water sparkled in the moonlight and slow wind was coming from the lake. It created small waves in the lake water while making a whooshing sound. Crickets were chirping. I could also hear the sound of the lake water hitting the wooden deck. When I reached the basement door, I flashed the light around me once. It was quite scary to stand there all by myself. I decided to get the bottles fast and go to bed after handing them to my friends. The lock on the door looked dusted. The key was not needed as I noticed the lock was already broken. I pushed the door in and it made a terrifying creaking sound. A dark stairway lied in front of me. I flashed my torchlight inside and saw a couple of wooden shelves down the basement. My footsteps started to create little creaking sound on the damp wooden stairs. The basement had a stuffy smell which made me realize no one came down here in years. Once I reached the basement, I walked towards the closet wooden shelf. It had a few bottles in it. Other shelves were almost empty. I took 2 bottles with me, and just when I turned to head back, I heard a soft squeaking sound coming behind the left side wall. First, I thought it might be a mouse or some other small animal. I flashed my light onto the wall, and the sound stopped. I ignored it and stepped on the stairs to go up. Just then, I heard that sound again. This time, the sound appeared a bit louder and it felt like someone whimpered. Sweat started to appear on my forehead. I was alone in an unknown house inside its dark, rusty basement at the Halloween night. Gathering all my courage, I flashed the light again at the wall and my heart flunked to my throat. I saw a frail, skinny woman lying on the floor with her face hidden into her folded, skinny knees. The woman was wearing a torn-out blue skirt and a pale white top, and something was shining on her wrist. I was so drunk that my torchlight made her wrist shine vividly into my eyes. She was sobbing in a very soft voice. I was scared, almost about to run, but I spoke in my broken voice. "Hey, are you all right?" For a moment, I thought it could be some homeless person on Halloween night who decided to take shelter here. That also explains the broken lock. The woman started to lift her face up just when I heard my friend Jack's voice coming from outside. "Max, why is it taking you so long? Just grab 2 bottles and come on out, man." Hearing his voice, I got my courage back and I called him saying, I think there's a homeless person down here, Jack. She might be needing our help." Jack came down with 2 of my friends and they flashed their lights all over the basement. Surprisingly, there was no one. The lady was gone. They all made fun of me for hallucinating ghosts after getting drunk on Halloween night. Embarrassed by myself, I also agreed that I might have hallucinated the entire incident and got back to the house. I lied down in my sleeping bag near the fireplace. My friends continued to party and drink like before. Just around 3 p.m., I woke up to go to the bathroom. I saw all my drunk friends lying here and there and sleeping like a rock. Some of the Halloween candles were still burning, but the fireplace ran out of wood. Light and shadow were playing all around. As I walked to the bathroom, I heard a knock on the glass window nearby. I turned to look, and what I saw terrified me for life. It was that woman from downstairs. Her face was in the dark, but I could see her standing outside the window. Her weak, frail hand kept knocking on the glass. Clank, clank, clank. Suddenly, she leaned to the glass, and I saw her horrifying face. Her eyeballs were dripping out of the eye sockets. Her face was so vicious that I could hardly figure out how she looked like. Suddenly, my eyes went to her lean wrist. At that very moment, I identified she was wearing the same bracelet that Jack's aunt wore. I might have thought she came back after all these years, but the way she looked, I was sure it wasn't a living person. I screamed with the top of my lungs and all of my friends woke up in horror. I pointed at the window, and we all saw that an evil-looking figure was standing outside our window. Everyone was already drunk enough to panic to the core. The woman started laughing hysterically and gestured us to follow her by moving her hand. We ran for our lives and got into the car. We all left immediately. What happened the next day was far more terrifying than this night. Hearing our story, Jack's parents thought his aunt actually came back. They called the cops, and we all got back to the farmhouse the next day. The cops started searching the property. While they were doing so, something reminded me of the basement. I took them to the basement, thinking they might find her there where I saw her the first time. A cop flashed his torchlight into the left side wall after I pointed out there was something sparkling under the worn-out bricks. The cops tried to pull it out, but seemed like it was stuck into the wall from the inside. The cops then started to kick the wall and a hollow sound came. It felt like there's an empty space behind the wall. After 4 to 5 kicks, the wall broke down, revealing a secret space stuffed with cobwebs and spiders. What happened next was beyond our imagination. They discovered a skeleton of a woman dressed in a blue skirt, white top, and the sparkling thing was the bracelet on her wrist. It was indeed Jack's aunt. Later, we came to know that her boyfriend murdered her. Instead of dumping her body somewhere else, he waited for the family to move out and came back to this house. He broke into the wine cellar and buried her inside the wall. The cops are still searching for that man. I stopped going out at Halloween nights after this incident, but when I think about that night, a thought revolves in my head. I don't think Jack's aunt wanted to scare me. Rather, I feel she wanted me to help her. That's why she gestured us to follow her. Just how she kept calling for Jack's grandpa, all the time being buried inside the wall. I'm a doctor by profession. Thus, be it holiday or weekday, we are bound to respond when duty calls. I'm a 30-year-old male working in the emergency ward. Needless to say, the emergency ward is always busy. I have seen enough cases of horrible accidents or suicide, which is why very few things in life can manage to scare me. But this one incident in particular still gives me perspiration whenever I think about it. It was the night of Halloween, and when the entire town was busy celebrating, me and my colleagues were busy saving lives, like always. It was around 8 p.m. when a case of suicide attempt got reported in our ward. I was changing the saline of one patient when my teammates came rushing to me. and they said they needed me immediately in the operation theater. Without any delay, I ran to the OT. After reaching there, I came to know from my fellow mates that a woman around the age of 28 to 29 has been admitted by an office building security guard to the hospital. She tried to commit suicide by jumping off from an office roof on the 5th floor. Her condition was very critical as she had some major head and spinal cord injuries. Her right eye got smashed and severely damaged after hitting the ground. She was bleeding terribly, which was another alarming situation that made us worry. After 2 hours of surgery, we somehow managed to stop her bleeding, but her condition didn't improve. Though doctors never speak of losing hope, but this time, we were not so sure about her chances of surviving this huge accident. I immediately told everyone to inform her family. As per the protocol, we also informed the local police station about this suicide case. I have seen many patients giving up hope, even in curable conditions, but this woman was giving a tough fight. Around 11 p.m., the nurse came and reported that her pulse is performing stable, but due to the huge loss of blood, her blood pressure is very low. I went to change her blood pouches. Her cabin was the last one in the emergency ward corridor. Due to the Halloween night, majority of the workers took off, hence the hospital was really quiet than usual. As I entered her cabin, I saw her lying on the bed breathing heavily. The oxygen mask on her face was getting filled with vapor whenever she exhaled. I silently changed her blood bags and checked her heart rate on the monitor. I had no other work in my hand, so I took a sit on the couch in her cabin just to keep an eye on her. Her blonde hair turned red in some areas because of her severe bleeding from the head. I thought to myself, what could be the possible reason for her to commit suicide? I felt curious that why wasn't she at a party on Halloween night? Time flew like the wind, and I dozed off on the couch, God knows when. It was around midnight when I woke from my slumber, hearing a sound. As I opened my eyes, I got extremely shocked. The woman was sitting on her bed and looking directly at me. Her face was heavily bandaged on the right side, but her partial face was clearly visible. She was staring at me with her left eye. The oxygen mask was hanging down her chin. I was highly startled to see such a sight. On such a condition, I couldn't believe how she managed to wake up even after being heavily sedated. I got my shit together and asked in a low voice, "Do you need anything, ma'am?" She just nodded her head, saying no. Then I again said, "You better sleep now. You need a lot of rest." She then smirked at me and said, "I am getting it already. Can you do me a favor?" Her words made no sense, but just to get her back in bed, I said, "Sure, what is it?" She looked at the door and replied, "When my husband arrives, tell him I saw him, and I will come for him." This time, I got completely sure that she wasn't hallucinating, and all this was just an outcome of her critical condition. I ignored her words and walked towards her bed. She kept staring at me. I went close to her and said, "I will tell your husband. Now, please, go back to sleep." After helping her lie down, I put the oxygen mask back on her mouth. I thought if I stayed too long in her cabin, she might wake up again, so I let her rest and went to my chamber. My eyes went to the clock in the hall. It was 3:30 a.m. I got a bit surprised that how come no one came to visit her, but it was already too late, so I decided to call her husband myself first thing in the morning. The next morning around 7 a.m., I came out of my chamber to check on her. As I reached her cabin, I found her bed empty. There were even new sheets on her bed. First, I thought she might have been discharged on the request of her family, but that made me really angry. Her condition was really serious and under no circumstances should she have been discharged, at least not today. I quickly rushed to the control desk. The nurse who attended her last night was standing there. I went to her and said in an irritated voice, "Who released the woman in cabin 9 without consulting me?" The nurse seemed really surprised as I asked the question. Her expression gestured that I am asking a very stupid question. I got even more irritated and said, "Please tell her husband to get her back here. She needs medical help. Her condition can deteriorate if they keep her." But the nurse didn't let me finish and said, Don't you know, doctor? I thought someone already told you. I was in total confusion, but it didn't last long. The nurse told me that she passed away around 3 a.m. Her husband came and took her body to organize the cremation ritual. It was 4:30 in the morning, and as I worked late, the ward workers thought not to wake me up from my chamber. The ground beneath my feet felt like they were falling apart. I couldn't think, I couldn't speak for at least an hour. I walked to my reporting head and asked for an off for that day. After I went home, I repeatedly told myself that no, I wasn't dreaming. She spoke to me. I remember each word that came out of her mouth. But how can she talk to me when she's already dead? A week later, a horrifying news came to our local newspaper. A famous industrialist died by falling off his office roof. His fellow employers said to the police that he was having an affair with his secretary. His wife came to know about it, which is why she tried to commit suicide from the roof of his office building on the night of Halloween. Police think this too was a suicide, though some people think it was his guilty conscience that drove him to take his own life. The time of his death was pronounced at 3 a.m. As I sat in my living room staring at the paper, suddenly the woman's words that night made sense to me. When I told her she needs to rest, she replied, "She's getting it already," which indicates she was already dead. A cold sensation rushed down my spine when I thought about the second part of her sentence that, "When my husband arrives, tell him I saw him tonight, and I will come for him." Did a dead person really come back to announce her revenge on a Halloween night? And most of all, did she really get it? I don't know.
I swear up and down that this story, as much as it sounds like it's a made-up run-of-the-mill scary doll story, is 100% true, and it still terrifies me. When I was a kid, I would spend a lot of time in Texas with my brother, dad, and stepmom. Mainly just my brother and stepmom, because my dad was in the military, and would frequently go on long trips, leaving us alone in whatever house we happened to be living in at the time. When I was about 5, we moved to a large, very old Victorian house. 3 stories, not including the attic and the basement. Lots of rooms, and as a little kid, I found it very fun to explore the house. In the attic, there was lots of old junk that the owner of the house was storing while we were renting it, including a huge collection of beautiful handcrafted porcelain dolls. There were hundreds of them lined up neatly on the back wall in a glass case, standing on their stands like an army ready for command. And as a little girl who loved ribbons and bows and anything girly, I was entranced. One doll in particular stood out to me. A beautiful red-hair, green-eyed doll in a blue silk dress with a matching ribbon in her hair. I begged my dad to let me play with her. I felt the need to hold and love her and have tea parties with her. He, of course, refused, saying that the dolls were worth more than I could imagine, and he wanted his deposit back when we moved. He kept the door locked for good measure, after catching me more than once staring in awe at the doll. A month went by, and I had all but forgotten about the doll, choosing to simply explore the house and play in my basement room with my Barbies. Until one day when I came home from dropping my dad off at the base and found the red-haired doll sitting on my bed. I was ecstatic, thinking that my dad had given me the doll and left it as a surprise, and I proceeded to play with the doll every second of every day until my dad came home. As soon as my dad saw the doll, he flipped out and yelled at me, spanked me, and took the doll away to lock back up in the attic, and only got more aggravated when he discovered that the attic door was still locked, and her was the only one to have the key. He couldn't figure out how I could have possibly picked the lock, and then re-picked it to lock it. His solution was I had somehow convinced my brother to do it for me. Another month went by, and my dad installed another lock on the attic, warning me and my brother what would happen if he found out we had been in the attic again while he was gone. That very night, when we returned home, the doll sat on my bed again, leaving me wary of its presence. Something that had once made me so happy now made me cautious and anxious. I told my stepmom, who immediately became angry and slapped me, then my brother, and tried to return the doll, only to find the attic door once again locked. She tore the house apart trying to find the keys, She was positive we had hidden them until giving up and locking the doll in her room. The night my dad came home, I was terrified, and he wouldn't speak to me or my brother at all, only giving a short speech about how we needed to go to our rooms and not come out. The next trip he made, we didn't see him off to the base. We sat in our rooms and had a quiet evening alone. I spent the night sulking and trying to figure out how the doll had gotten into my room. Later, after I had fallen asleep, I heard soft music box music that slowly woke me up. I felt something near my feet, and thinking it was my cat curled up, I reached down, only to find instead of fur, a handful of hair. I turned my light on and screamed. What looked like every dollar from their attic was in my room, sitting at my tea table, on my dollhouse, and positioned in standing position on my bed and in various parts of my room. The door slammed open, and my dad appeared in the doorway where he had apparently been waiting for me to head to the attic to claim a doll. He took one look at them, grabbed me, and ran out of the house, dragging my brother and stepmom along with us. He refuses to speak of them to this day. The most important part of the story is the backstory of the red-haired doll. Apparently, the original builder and owner of the house had a daughter who died when she was about 8, and it was customary to make a doll of their likeness, made out of their real hair, and dressed in the same clothes the child wore. I think it was that little girl, because I never felt like it was dangerous to play with the doll. I felt like she was lonely and trying to make a friend.
This is a story of my college days. I lived in a rented house with my roommate, Nancy. She loved to party. On the other hand, I was always a shy girl. Even though we were poles apart, Nancy always cared for me like a big sister. She used to drive away bullies for me, took care of me whenever I fell sick. This is why I could never say to her. I admired her for being kind-hearted, even after being one of the popular girls on the campus. Our house was on the outskirts of the city. There were hardly 10 to 12 houses in our residential area. Nancy and I used to go to college together in her car. The day was 31st October, Halloween. After waking up in the morning, I went to the kitchen to make coffee. Nancy's bedroom was on the left side of the kitchen. After pouring myself a cup of coffee, I went to check on her to see if she had returned or not. Nancy was dating a guy who was a senior. He had a place of his own at 5 to 7 houses down from our place. She often spends the night with him and returns home early. I never had an issue with her staying away at night because this guy was a nice person, so I knew she would be safe. As I turned to head back to my room, Nancy opened the main door and entered the house. The reason I could tell it was her, because Nancy had a habit after coming home. She used to throw her shoes off on the floor, making loud thuds and calling out for me saying, "Katie, I'm home." Hearing her voice put a smile on my face. Nancy rushed towards me and said, "I have the most exciting news for us." I knew this would be about going to a party tonight. Still, to enjoy the excitement on her face, I pretended to be curious. She told me that her boyfriend is throwing a huge party at his house tonight. It's a Halloween costume party, and we both are invited there. I was never a party animal, but there was no way Nancy would have taken a no from me on this. She is crazy about Halloween parties. Anyways, I also wanted to go out and socialize a bit for a change, so I said yes. She really got excited and said we will go for our costume shopping after lunch. Calling off all other plans for one day, Nancy and I rode in her car and went to the city mall. The mall was quite crowded, and the entire decoration was Halloween themed. Almost all the shops had something related to Halloween for their customers. We started to check out the costumes in various shops. After roaming around for about an hour, Nancy and I finally bought our costumes. She wanted to be Harley Quinn and insisted me to buy the Catwoman outfit. I did, and we headed back towards the exit, just when Nancy said she had to pick up some snacks and booze, so we will have to go to the food mart for some time. The food mart was in the basement of the mall, so we got down the stairs. Many boys and girls were already wearing costumes and wandering around the food mart. Everyone seemed busy buying booze for their Halloween party. Nancy told me to wait near the vegetable corner and went to the right side to buy beers. I stood there for 2 to 3 minutes and kept watching everyone in an excited mood. Suddenly, my eyes went to the left corner of the food mart. I noticed a tall guy dressed as the urban legend, the Hook Man, standing right after the entrance. His big hoodie over his head kept his entire face in darkness. Being honest, after looking at his hand, I felt kind of creepy. I kept looking at other directions just to understand if he was watching me or not. Every second standing there, I could tell that he was not only watching me, but literally scanning me with his dark hidden eyes. I stood like a statue for 10 minutes, then started to walk towards the alcohol section. I saw Nancy with lots of stuff in her handbasket standing near the billing queue. She was standing behind 2 people, so I felt relieved that we will leave soon. I walked towards her and stood beside her. She looked at me and said, "Thank God he came. My hands are so full. Help me." I quickly hid the tension on my face and hold a few packets. My eyes kept checking every nooks and corner for that guy, but I didn't see him. I thought he might have left with his friends, and I overthought the entire scenario. Nancy and I started walking towards the exit after paying the money. As usual, Nancy was talking about the party, and I calmed a bit. Just when we were 9 to 10 hands distance from the exit, I noticed that same guy. He was standing near the exit and watching us walk towards him. I really got freaked out this time, but couldn't say anything to Nancy. We kept walking to the gate, and I understood we are going to walk past him. It was the scariest few seconds of my life when I almost reached close to him. My breath grew denser and I was out of words. Just the moment when I was about to cross him, I heard his evil laughter. As soon as we got out of the mall, I hopped inside the car. Nancy started the engine and reversed the car to make a U-turn. He was standing near the mall gate. I didn't utter a single word about him to my roommate. I felt she would think I am making up a stupid story. We arrived at our boyfriend's house and started to put up the decorations and prepare ourselves for the party. The entire evening went in such a rush that I almost forgot about this incident at the mall. I also told myself that it was some drunk freehead who tried to spook me in a Hook Man costume. The party started, and the house got filled with crazy college students. Nancy and I drank beer and joined everyone on the dance floor. The spooky neon lights and yellow lighted pumpkin heads all around the house set the right mood for the Halloween party. I was actually having fun, but after a few hours, I started to feel really drunk. The lights all around me with the dramatic decorations made my head feel heavier. So I decided to head back to my place before I end up vomiting and embarrassing myself. I went to Nancy and asked for the house keys. She handed me over the keys, asking, will I be okay to go alone? I didn't want her to miss the party, so I said I will be fine. I also told her that she could stay at her boyfriend's tonight if she wants. She got happier and told me to go home and lock the doors and have a sound sleep. She will come back early and will also fix me some breakfast in bed. She knew I was going to wake up with a hangover. Anyways, I left the party and started to walk down the street. It wasn't a very long walk, but because I was drunk, I walked pretty slowly. I was being careful not to stumble upon a rock and flip on the road. It was 1:30 a.m., hence the streets were completely empty. There was only the sound of the hollow wind passing by. I was almost near the house just when I heard the sound of a twig snapping behind me. I turned around, but there was no one. I thought, my mind is hallucinating due to too much alcohol in my stomach. I opened the main door with a trembling hand. I got inside the house and locked the door behind me. My head was hurting really bad just when I felt the urge to vomit. I ran towards Nancy's room as it was the closest to the main door. Her room was dark, but the streetlight coming from the window helped me to reach the bathroom. I freshened myself up and decided to go to my room to sleep like a rock. As I opened the door of my room, I saw the window was open. I couldn't remember whether I locked it or not before leaving the house, but knowing myself, I thought I might have. My room was too dark. The window was right beside my bed, so I could spot it with the help of the streetlights again. I was in no position to find the switch, so I threw myself over it. I realized the other half of the room was entirely in darkness. I started to take off my shoes just when I felt something move in that darkness. At first, I wasn't sure of it, but after a while, I saw something pointy and shining in that darkness. My head had no control over my body, so I just sat there for some seconds. Just when I realized I should turn on the light to check what it is, someone knocked on the main door. This time, I got really freaked out, but after a small pause, I heard Nancy's voice. "Katie, open the door!" I felt so relieved to know that she came back, I ran to the main door, leaving the room at the moment. Nancy came in and said, "I thought I shouldn't leave you alone tonight, so I came back. Are you all right?" I hugged her and said, "I just got a bit scared being alone in my room." She replied in a comforting voice that she will sleep in my room tonight. As we walked towards our room, we heard a loud thud outside. After getting into the room, I noticed the window was closed this time. My head couldn't take it anymore, so without paying attention to anything, I immediately lied in my bed and fell asleep. If you think the story is over, then let me tell you that the scariest part of the story is yet to come. The next morning, when I woke up, I almost had a heart attack. It felt like all my blood had rushed to my face. The wall on the other side of my room freaked me even in that morning light. Someone has wrote on the wall with a sharp, pointy, hook-like object, "Lucky that your roommate came back."
I have been working at a department store for the past 2 years. Although retail wasn't something I wanted to necessarily do, it was much better than my previous job in the food business, so I was grateful to not have to touch food all day, and would take the world of customer service much more gratefully than the food industry. It was the middle of January, and store is usually quite dead towards the end of the day. Usually, the following month after Christmas is never really busy, due to people probably not trying to spend money after the gift-giving season, and the cold weather of the winter season in Canada never really helped the situation much. People not in the mood to leave the comfort of their own houses in the middle of a snowstorm. That meant that they put less people on shift, and I was alone in the fitting room. I work at a pretty big store, and alongside the weather conditions, that meant that the employees were usually spread out on the floor, not within close proximity in comparison to what they put during the busy season. None of us wore earpieces, as we did most of our paging through the speaker system. It was a Wednesday night, around 8, and the store closed at 9. I was usually put on the cash register, but often frequented the fitting room when they needed the help. It was a very quiet night, and I spent the first couple of hours of my shift helping organize the beauty section that is right next to the fitting room, or go speak to my lovely coworker who worked in the jewelry section, helping the few customers that actually wanted to try clothes on when they came by. There was a man who came to the fitting room with 2 dress shirts, and I didn't think anything of it. After all, he was nothing I've never seen before. Older, tall, kind of stocky, muscular, plain. I did notice that he seemed dressed rather nicely. A clearly expensive suit and a nice shoulder bag. I assumed he must have come to the store after his day at work. I counted the number of articles he was bringing in, as that was mandatory in order for me to monitor the flow of clothes and try to stop theft. Handed him a number corresponding to the number of articles he was taking in, and asked him politely to put the clothes back on the hanger, in French rather than English, because Quebec requires us to speak French first to customers. To which he replied with a simple, "No problem." I noticed he had a thick accent, although I wasn't and still not able to place my finger on it. I think it might have been Russian, but I can't say for sure. The man walked into the fitting room, and I didn't think much of it. I helped the other customers who came out of their rooms, counting the articles they came out with and matched it with their numbers, and hung them back in their place on the rack. A few moments passed by, and the man came out. Not really putting much thought into it, I took the both dress shirts from him. He didn't want any of them, and took back his number, said thank you, and turned to place the clothes on their rack. Usually, this was the point where the customer would just leave the fitting room, but when I turned around to go back to the front, he was still there. I asked him if there was anything I could do for him, or if he still wanted the shirts that I had just put away. The man smiled and looked at me, not answering, and I felt a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. He was looking at me as if he wanted to say something, and me, being the 5'4" girl who hates confrontation of any kind, just nervously laughed and started to organize the desk at the front of the fitting room entrance, awkwardly arranging all the numbers, although they were already in order. He asked for my name, to which I just looked down at the name tag I was wearing and repeated it. He told me it was a beautiful name. I laughed nervously, never knowing what to do in these sort of situations, and being nice to him was a part of my job in customer service. Besides, he didn't do anything wrong, just complimented me. I said thank you and looked away, avoiding eye contact. He then just stood there for what felt like 20 minutes, but in reality was just 3. He stood there as I helped other customers, and it was beginning to make me feel very uncomfortable. Not wanting to be rude, but also not wanting to subject myself to being uncomfortable for the rest of my shift, or however long he was planning to be there, I asked him if there was anything else he needed help with. Here's where I began to get scared. He then proceeded to tell me that he will be waiting for me at 9:30 outside the doors of our store. He wanted to take me out. Confused, I looked at him oddly. How did he know that we finished at that time? The store closed at 9, and we usually spend 30 minutes cleaning up the store. I suppose that information isn't hard to guess, but it still felt weird. Why did he want to take me out? I once again laughed nervously, because that seemed to be the only thing I was able to do when uncomfortable, and politely declined, saying I had to get home and study. He laughed, taking a step closer towards me, and I instinctively took a step back. He didn't accept that answer because he just smiled once more. I'll be waiting for you outside the door where all the employees leave from, in the truck alley. I'll be there. There was a door that employees exited the mall from because the normal doors usually locked around 9:15, and we always finished later than that. So we take the door that takes us in a slight alley where all the trucks go to drop off shipments from our store. Being someone who hates confrontation and who doesn't do well with controlling my emotions, I felt myself start to tear up at his comment. No employee is allowed to mention the door we leave from. It's a company rule. Since we usually finish late and the parking lot is dark, they don't want anyone to know where we exit from as a precaution. I told him once more that I appreciated his offer, but I wasn't interested, and I had to continue my work. I politely told him to leave, when he put a hand on my shoulder, and I felt myself freeze up. I remember thinking, praying that one of my coworkers would show up to pick up the rack, or the jewelry employee would stop filling the cases and turn around. Obviously, with my luck, nobody did. He told me I was a pretty girl, and he couldn't wait to meet me in the alley at the end of my shift. He said he has a nice apartment and a cute dog, as if the dog was going to make me change my mind, and we could have a fun time. Desperate, I said I had a boyfriend, and he was going to be picking me up, hoping that would deter him, but he just laughed. He said my name, and then he told me that wasn't something that usually stopped him, placing his hand on my shoulder this time. I honestly really began to feel scared, and excused myself to use the phone on my desk, shaking his hand off of me that I hadn't realized was gripped on me so tightly. I paged the number for my coordinator, who curtly replied before I was even able to get a word in that she was busy with a customer, and hung up. Unsure of what to do, as the man was still next to me as he followed me to my desk, I called my manager, who thankfully replied. When he saw that I was speaking with someone on the phone, he left the fitting room, but that didn't make me feel any better. I told my manager what had happened, and with good reason, she freaked out, telling me I need to report him immediately, reminding me that with people like that, I really have to be careful. She told me to call security, to which I did, and the security guard told me he had an eye on him through the camera. It was around 8:30 at this point, and I was getting ready to start my closing tasks, still paranoid about what the man had said. To be fair, I am a paranoid person, and I watch way too many murder documentaries, so I may be overthinking. This sounded like the beginning of an abduction movie, honestly. I kind of calmed down, not seeing the man anymore, when the security guard called me back. He wanted to let me know that the man had never left and was circling the store. I felt more dread than before pop in my stomach. He didn't leave? Thankfully, he hadn't come back to see me. I felt kind of better for the fact that the security guard had seen him, so if anything did happen, there was someone who was able to identify him. Once again, overthinking. By the time the store closed and it was time to leave, two of my coworkers, Evan and Ethan, 2 boys who worked in the warehouse, made sure to walk with me all the way to my car, not letting me be alone. I appreciated it a lot. Although I didn't want to admit it, I was scared walking through that alley, and I was even paranoid he was going to follow me home. I took the extra long route to see if anyone was trailing me, to which he wasn't. When I walked through the safety of the door of my house and locked it behind me, I let go of a breath I wasn't even aware I was holding in. I make sure now to always leave the store using the buddy system. I never walk alone, and I always make sure I'm hyper aware of my surroundings. I never wear my name tag anymore. Luckily, nothing happened to me. And maybe I was overthinking the entire experience, but I wanted to stress that even if your job is in customer service, if someone makes you uncomfortable, speak up. You should not have to be subjected to this behavior at your work, or anywhere for that matter. And to the creepy man who wouldn't leave me alone in the fitting room, let's not meet again.
Now, Christmas is where I go all out. It's my favorite holiday of the year, and nothing can stop my Christmas spirit. Unless, if it's what happened this year. Me and my daughter, Beatrice, and her grandparents, my parents, usually go to town and shop for Christmas decor until we can't bear carrying bags over bags of lights and little knickknacks to scatter around the house. But my parents said they couldn't make it this year because my dad has fallen and broke his hip, and my mom had to stay at the hospital to see if he was doing all right. So it was just me and Beatrice. Luckily, they have just opened up a new mall, and it had tons of holiday shops. It was at the back of town, and I was clever enough that the parking spaces would become extinct in 0.5 seconds back there. So I had no choice but to work my way back there, from shop to shop. There was, alas, something I found in there that caught my eye. And before you knew it, it was sold. When we finally got back to the end of town, my backbone felt like it was going to let loose and crumble. I was wanting to hurry up, but then, in the middle of the long hallway, there was a small Santa, looking at me, staring at my daughter. I was a little creeped out, but it was a mall Santa. Those guys wouldn't dare to hurt me or my daughter. But something was off. He was tall, very tall, and he was so skinny that his skin was basically useless at hiding his bones. Beatrice noticed him and started jumping up and down. "It's Santa, Mommy! Look, it's Santa! Can we go over there, Mommy, please?" I agreed, and we slowly walked over to him. There were no kids in like. There was no big display. It was just Santa in a foldable chair. We walked a little closer until he grinned, but from ear to ear showed all his crooked, jagged teeth. That's when my mind freaked, and I turned around and started to walk to the shops. Beatrice quite didn't agree. She started to throw a fit. Beatrice never throws a fit. She then started to scream and growl and bite me like a wild animal. It was horrific. Beatrice never acted like this. I was kind of scared from her, but I picked her up and tried to walk to the car. "But Mommy, it's Santa. Let me see Santa. I hate you. I want to see Santa." I buckled her up, put the bags in the car, and drove off home. But there was something that I remembered. I remembered that the mall Santa said something once. I whipped around. He said something by the lines of, "Bad little kids get put on the naughty list," and chuckled. I became paranoid at that point and couldn't sleep until 10 p.m. I then woke up with Beatrice in my face whispering, "Mommy, Santa is here. Look." I looked at the clock. It was 3 in the morning. I guessed that Beatrice wouldn't leave me alone, so I got out of bed and went to the front door and looked through a window nearby. I froze. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But most importantly, I wanted to hide. There was the same Santa. The Santa that was as skinny as Jack Skellington, and in the same Santa costume as before. rustling through the snow and looking at me while coming to the front door. What scared me the most is Beatrice asking me, "Mommy, where's Santa's sleigh?" I didn't know what to do. I grabbed Beatrice and did something that I regret to this day. I hid her in her bedroom closet and ran to barricade the door. I heard pounding on the front door. And then silence. But only for a little bit. A window shattered. He was inside the house. I needed some self-defense. Then I heard thumps downstairs. But luckily I remembered. There was a vent inside Beatrice's closet. I came in the closet to find Beatrice with all the color drained from her face. I managed to rip the vent cover off the wall and started to crawl inside. I was crawling for a long time, and still a whoosh of air seemed to come from in front of me. It was from outside. I knew that I could somehow get outside and grab an axe. I somehow got the vent cover off and ran in my PJs and went to the shed and grabbed a small hand axe. I got a ladder to climb up the wall and went to get back into the house. Luckily, I got back into Beatrice's closet, and I locked the door behind me and went back into the barricaded bedroom. The footsteps were coming up the stairs now, slowly. Then there was a large bang on the door. The doorknob twisted, turned. Then it stopped. The footsteps went down the stairs and out the front door. Then I realized that I left the vent cover open, and then I left the ladder there too. I then heard Beatrice scream and laughter in the vents. I heard her wail and scream. Beatrice's life was in my hands. Out of nowhere, I cut the door with my axe over and over again until I made a hole. It reminded me of the scene in The Shining. I reached my hand in the hole and unlocked the door. I slammed the door open to find nothing. Nobody there. Not even Beatrice. I looked out the window and saw the mall Santa carrying a large sack that was moving. That's when I called the police. A few days later, they came to my house and handed over Beatrice, while telling me the whole story. The Santa was a homeless serial killer hunting down children that were bad or disrespectful to their parents. My daughter was one of the lucky ones that survived. To this day, I still don't know what to expect.
I'm searching for my sister until now. We lived in a small city in Houston, Texas. It was my parents, my younger brother and sister, and myself. Being the oldest sibling, my brother and sister often obeyed me. Taking advantage of my power over them, I ordered them to do little unimportant stuff like telling them to get me a glass of water or having them go get me the TV remote whenever I was feeling a bit too lazy. My parents often kept me in charge everywhere we went. Living in a small city can give one memorable childhood moments, but can also leave someone with a scar for a lifetime. Halloween used to be that one special festival that made our town people go crazy. From wearing costumes to backyard barbecue parties, the entire evening made this day super special for every kid. For one night, we could all eat as many candies as we wanted, and our parents wouldn't tell us no. I was 12 years old, and my brother was 8, and my sister was 5. Being excited for this big upcoming Halloween event, we all went to the city mall and bought our costumes. Our dad took us to some various shops. The day was just a blast. When we got back home, the whole town gathered in the city park and started preparing for the festival. Some families arranged barbecue grills, some put up flags and colorful decorations. Our family made some carved pumpkin heads, and a family in our neighborhood arranged all the candles. After working for most of the evening, we all decided to take a break and agreed to finish the rest of the work by tomorrow afternoon, which was the day of Halloween. After coming back home, I had a quiet family dinner as everyone was tired after a long day. My mother tucked my brother and sister in, and then came and tucked me in after I settled down in my bed. The three of us slept in a big room. My brother and sister's bed were on the left side of the wall, while mine was on the right side, just beside the doorway. Though I picked on my brother and sister, I no doubt loved them and felt like protecting them. Thus, I chose to sleep beside the door, like a big brother. Being the youngest, my sister used to get scared easily in the dark. She sometimes woke up crying, saying she had a bad dream. I'd then go to her and caress her head for a bit to make her fall back asleep. And I would do this while telling her I loved her unconditionally. That night, when everyone was asleep, I woke up hearing a heavy breathing and a soft sobbing sound coming from the other side of the room. I sat up in bed and rubbed my sleepy eyes to have a proper look around the room. As my vision slowly adjusted with the darkness in our room, I noticed my sister standing against the wall, just beside our bedroom window. At first, I thought something came into the room from the window, but I saw that the window was still locked. My sister was breathing heavily and kept staring at me with her frightful eyes. I asked her, "What is it? Why are you out of bed? Is it a bad dream again?" She nodded her head slowly and said in a sobbing tone, "There's a goblin in our backyard, and it's calling me!" I got spooked at first, but then decided to go to the window and check it out myself. What if it's a burglar or someone with bad intentions? Then I might have to tell Dad. I gathered all the courage I had and went up to the window. My sister clasped my hand with her little palm and kept shaking her head, gesturing no. I calmed her down and made her sit on her bed, and then walked over to the window. I saw a small kid wearing a goblin costume, and they were standing in the middle of our backyard, looking straight at this window. At first, I heaved a sigh of relief, as it wasn't actually a burglar. Then I opened the window and said, "Hey, it's too late. You need to go to sleep, otherwise you'll miss the city park celebration tomorrow." My voice was a bit loud, so my dad came back to check on why we were still awake. But when I looked back after explaining everything to him, the kid was gone. I shrugged it off as a small, nothing to worry about incident and went back to sleep. The next day, everyone was running around the entire city. The festival mode hit, and I forgot about all the stuff from last night. Around 5 p.m., after my dad got back home from working at the city park, we all started on our Halloween get-ups. I was dressed as Pinocchio, wearing a fake pointy long nose made from ice cream cones by my mom. My brother and sister dressed as the Shining Sisters, which pissed my brother off as he had to dress like a girl. But after my dad handed us our buckets to collect candy, we all cheered up. When we came out of the house, every little kid in town was dressed as some spooky Halloween character and were wandering around the streets and houses asking for trick-or-treats. I went to our neighbor's house with my brother and sister, and our candy hunting mission began. After collecting buckets full of candy, we decided to go see the fireworks while eating the candy that we just got. The park was filled with kids and their parents. The three of us sat down under a tree and started having a fun time. Suddenly, I saw my sister looking to her right side, and she started breathing heavily again, just like last night. As I followed her eyes, I saw that same goblin kid from last night about 15 feet away from us. I looked back at my sister and said, "Hey, don't be scared. That's just another kid in a Halloween costume just like us." My sister believed me, and she calmed down. I waved, looking at the kid, and the kid waved back to us. The kid started to wave us over with his hand while standing there silently. I got up and went to the kid with my brother and sister in tow. I looked at him and said, "Well, hi, where do you live?" The kid didn't say a word, and only his goblin mask kept smirking at us. It felt a bit unusual now, so I said, "Hey, can't you talk?" But suddenly, the kid did something completely unexpected. He snatched my little brother's candy bucket and started running in the opposite direction. I realized this was a little mean kid, so I kept chasing after him. Seeing me running after him, my brother and sister also started running with me. The goblin kid ran straight to a minivan parked under a dark bushy tree, far away from the crowded park. Just as I was about to grab his shoulder, he elbowed me in the eye so hard that I fell and hit the ground really hard. Suddenly, the minivan's back door opened up and two guys in entirely black attire grabbed my brother and sister and pulled them inside. I rose up to stop them, but someone already started the minivan and closed one door, taking my sister inside. While the other guy tried to pull my brother inside, I shouted, "Leave my brother alone! Let my sister go!" I heard the guy yelling to the driver to slow down the car, saying, "Oh, this one's not a girl, it's her brother! Ah, damn it, stupid Halloween costumes!" The minivan slowed up a bit, and that devilish man threw my brother onto the road. Even though the van was going slow, my brother still scratched up his arms and knees. He even got a bump on his head from hitting a rock on the road. I quickly grabbed him and ran towards the van, shouting for help. But due to the entire area being secluded and everyone so busy celebrating at the park, no one was there to hear my cry. The van started to pick up speed, and that goblin kid leaned to close the other door. Just when he was about to do so, he removed his mask. And I saw it was just this bearded, ugly-looking man. It was probably a dwarf. He started laughing at me in a squeaky voice, and he started to wave goodbye at me as the van disappeared into the darkness. My parents and I are still hopeful that my sister is alive somewhere in this world. My parents still live in the same city, waiting for her to come back one day. I moved to California with my brother, and we filed cases to every police station possible. We kept creating search campaigns for my sister, using every social media platform we could. My brother and I never celebrated a festival again. Not after she was kidnapped by that horrible bunch of thugs. I'm sure that dwarf man must have followed and spotted my sister on the night before Halloween, and then they planned everything out ahead of time for the next day. I'm still so angry at myself for not taking this matter to my parents in the first place, and for chasing a stranger with my little brother and sister instead of going to my parents for help. I pray to God every day, asking no harm to come to my little sister. Those horrible men with their preference for kidnapping little girls just... it shocks my heart with fear every day. So, Kathy, if you see this or come to know about us in any way, please come home. We'll wait forever for you. And I'd also like to say to every kid out there on Halloween, or, any day of your life, never go after a stranger without your parents' knowledge.
I live in a military town, so everyone here is either in the military like my husband and I, or they are the locals. Backwoods redneck type you find near the Bible Belt. Most of the general population is pretty poor. A lot of homeless. A lot of, well, there's no nice way to put it. White trash type folk. I live near a Walmart that I usually go shopping at, and during the day it's filled with your usual Walmart shoppers. At night, however, it's usually full of weirdos. Some normal people there, of course, just trying to grab last-minute groceries or medicine or whatever. But some people who just don't have anywhere else to be, or they're high or drunk, and Walmart is open 24/7, so they just come to hang out there like it's a damn arcade or something. Anyway, it was like 11:30 at night, and I realized my daughter was out of formula. I have to make her bottles for the day every morning for daycare, so I had to go get formula before morning. I told my husband I'd be back in a few minutes and drove down the road. In the baby aisle, I grabbed her formula and stopped to look at a cute dress for her. I was looking through the baby clothes when I saw someone out of the corner of my eye and felt the hairs on my arms stand up. I glanced at him and then did a double take. This man was standing there, just staring at me. He didn't seem to be bothered by the fact that I noticed him. I did this weird nervous fake laugh and said something like, "Oh, These are so cute, huh? He didn't say anything. He just kind of smirked and kept staring. The dude was like a few inches taller than me, maybe 5'9", white, with long hair, and he looked either homeless or severely down on his luck. He had one hand on the crotch of his pants, kind of nonchalantly, like it just rested there. He was maybe 6 feet away from me. I started to get nervous and felt my palms start sweating. I said something dumb about have a good night and just kind of fast walked away. But in my haste to get away from him, I turned left toward the back of the store. I decided to grab a 12-pack of Coke Zero, in addition to the formula, and then decided to get out of there. I hadn't grabbed a cart, so I couldn't really carry much more. On my way back to the front of the store, I heard him shuffling behind me, keeping pace with my speed walking. I tried to calm myself down and write it off as him just also going to check out. I got into the 10 items or less line. He got in the line behind me. He had no items, but he pulled a candy bar off the shelf and set it on the counter behind my stuff. At this point, I could smell him, and he stank like body odor and stale beer. I turned my head away from him and tried to move a little closer to the woman in front of me. He moved closer too. Then I felt something brush my left butt cheek. I turned towards him sharply and said, "Hey!" He mumbled an apology. Keep in mind, I am wearing jeans and a baggy t-shirt. Not that it should matter, but I look like crap, is what I'm trying to get at. I turned back towards the counter and the cashier started ringing up my 2 items. 2 seconds later, the man pinched my other butt cheek. Hard. At this point, I turned around and said very loudly, "Hey, stop touching my ass!" He turned red and the cashier froze. She asked if there was a problem. "Yes," I replied. "This guy just pinched my butt, and I don't know him, and he's creeping me out." She looked unsure of what to do and asked him to please step away from me before she called security. He did, wordlessly, and then just stood there glaring daggers at me. I pretended I didn't notice and paid for my things. As soon as she bagged up the stuff, I booked it out of the store. I got maybe 10 steps into the parking lot when I heard the doors open behind me. Panicking, I turned and saw him marching directly toward me. I bolted. My car was 2 lanes away, and I yanked out my keys and unlocked it while I ran. I could hear him behind me, grunting and panting. I felt adrenaline kick in and tears in my eyes. I ran, swinging the bag and the case of soda, flung myself into the driver's seat, and turned the key in the ignition before the door even shut. I threw it in reverse without looking just as he slammed his body onto the hood of my car and yelled something. I peeled out of the lot at almost 30 miles an hour, and he flew off my hood and into the ground, and I drove the mile home going well over the limit, breathing hard and feeling like I was going to hyperventilate. When I got home, I still had chills. I raced inside and locked the door. My husband wanted to go find him and beat his ass, his solution for pretty much anything. But I just wanted to shut the windows and crawl into bed. I don't know what makes people do the things they do. Do they not realize how terrifying they come off as? I don't even want to leave my house without mace and a taser and a railgun.
I was going to attend a Halloween celebration at my sister's house after work. She lived quite far from me. The shortest way to get to her house was by traveling the subway car, which takes 20 minutes to reach. The nearest subway station to my workplace was at 10 minutes walking distance. I arranged my schedule accordingly that day, planning that if I leave at 6:30 p.m., I will easily reach her house by 7:15 p.m. I didn't want to be late, but as usual, life doesn't work according to plans all the time. The moment when I was just about to leave, my boss called me and handed me an important work. It's only been 3 months since I have joined this new office, so there was no way I could have given any excuse to my boss. With a sad face, I again unpacked my bag and started to work. The office only had our security guard on the ground floor, and everyone else left early that day. I managed to finish my work by 7:45 p.m., and I calculated that if I hurry up, I can still catch the 8 p.m. subway car. I quickly packed my bags and rushed towards the metro station. My sister called me, and as I took her call to tell her that I was on my way, my phone lost its signal. I realized that it is because I have entered the subway station. The station was completely empty. I checked the arrival time of the next train, and with relief, I saw that I have made it. Didn't have to wait long, as the train came at 8 p.m. sharp, and I got on it. The berth that I was in had no one. I sat down on the left side aisle, facing the opposite side of the train, so that I could see the platforms passing by. I put on my earplugs to listen to some music as I was going to get off in the 8th station. My eyes were on the window just when I felt there's someone else inside this train with me. I looked around and saw a man sitting on the right side facing me. He was sitting at a distance, but I could see him clearly. He wore an old suit of faded brown color with surprisingly white pants. He was at first looking outside the window, but then he turned back at me and smiled in a very creepy way. His smile was so big that it almost spread from one ear to another. I thought to myself, there was no one else present on the platform. The train hasn't reached the next station yet. Then how come he got inside? My mind was going through a lot of confusion as I started to feel uncomfortable with this guy alone in a subway car at Halloween night. The train was decorated with fake cobwebs and little lights for Halloween. I shifted my eyes towards the decoration and decided to ignore this man. I hope he will get off before me. The next station arrived, but the man didn't get off. I thought to check my phone in case it has got a signal so I could call my sister. I was going through my phone just when the man made a very creepy move. He turned towards me and said in a husky voice, "If you want, you can use my phone. It has a signal." I was pretty sure that we were in an underground subway, so there's no way phones can get a signal here. I awkwardly smiled and said, "No thanks, my stop will come in some time." The man seemed a bit disheartened with my refusal. He then stood up and said, "Why aren't a pretty thing like you celebrating on Halloween night?" I felt really offensive with his exaggerated comments. I stood up and replied in a loud voice, "Look, mister, I don't know you, so stop harassing me or I'll call the emergency number on the subway car. Also, there are security cameras inside the car, you know." The man looked startled with my words and moved his eyes back to the window. At the 5th station, an old woman got into the subway car, which gave me some air of relief. She looked at the man and then looked at me. Maybe she guessed something and came to sit beside me. I thanked her for her kind gesture by smiling at her. It was going all well, but the woman got down the next station, and again, the fear of being alone with this creepy stranger acquired my heart. I realized I was just 2 stations away, so I got up and went to stand near the door. I wanted to get off as soon as I can. After a few seconds, the man also got up and came towards me. I faced my back towards him, but I could see him standing behind me on the glass door of the subway car. Suddenly, I heard his heavy breath very close to my ear, and my heart froze in fear. I noticed on the glass door that he was smelling my hair. His nostrils were becoming big as he inhaled the smell of my ear, while exhaling the warm air by his mouth. I could tell he was drunk by the smell of his mouth. I wanted to teach that guy a lesson, but I'm a short, lean man, and the only thing I had on my hand was my backpack, which wasn't enough for protection. I was numb with fear and terror. I could barely move. The only option I had is to wait for my platform. So I gathered all my courage and stood there silently. I was waiting for the door to open and was all set to run for my life. The train started to enter the platform just when the man whispered into my ears, "Happy Halloween, little birdie. Now fly away." The door opened just then, and without looking behind, I ran as fast as I could. Once I reached my sister's house, I broke into tears. My family calmed me down, and I somehow managed myself that night. A few days later, I was sitting at my house watching TV when a news flashed into the screen. I saw that same guy being arrested by the cops from a subway station. The news revealed that he was a murderer who broke out of prison the night before Halloween. He was found by a patrolling officer in the middle of the night, throwing an unconscious girl on the railway track. The officer called for backup and stopped him right then. They somehow managed to save the girl, but she was found with a serious head injury. The man supposedly hit her from behind and wanted her to get crushed by an upcoming subway car. The man has been sent to a mental institution for his lifetime. I couldn't take the subway rides for 3 months after this incident. I am terrified to walk alone at night, even though I know that guy can never hurt me again. But the only thing that makes me question is, why did he let me get away that night? Even in my dreams, I hear him whisper in my ears, "Fly away, little birdie, fly." Ghosts are not the only thing that can make your Halloween night a horrible experience for your entire life.
Weird things started happening to me about a year ago. I moved into a new unit in Brisbane and got my porcelain dolls back from my mother's place. I've had the dolls since I was 5 years old. Everyone used to tell me they were evil, but I didn't believe them. Anyway, I put the 7 dolls away in a box and left them in the spare room. I then began having nightmares, starting with 1 or 2 a week. After a little while, they started to occur almost every night. I've never experienced nightmares like this in my entire life. These were full-on extreme night terrors. I didn't understand what was going on and was exhausted all the time from lack of sleep. I then started hearing some kind of scratching noise coming from inside the closet or from just outside my room late at night, never during the day. At the time, I thought it might be a mouse. These things happened for a couple of months. One time, I was sitting in the lounge room watching TV when all of a sudden I saw 2 small red eyes on the side of my cat's body when he was standing on my lap. They were just staring at me. I looked behind me to see where it was coming from and saw nothing but a blank wall. I looked back and the eyes were still looking at me. Then they slowly faded away. I always felt a strange, uncomfortable presence in the house, but I wasn't sure if it was because I had just moved in on my own and was scaring myself, or if it was something else. I think I used to make excuses for everything, so I didn't think I was going crazy. On another occasion, I was lying in bed and had the outside hall light on when I saw a murky, dark shadow come across the ceiling and into my room, and then it disappeared. The last thing that happened before I spoke to someone about the weird events was when I saw a demonic-looking face in the reflection of the base of my lamp. It was staring at me. The thing had dark circles as eyes, and it wasn't clear like a human face, but was definitely a face. I turned off the light and ignored it, and went back to sleep. I eventually spoke to a lady at work, a Jehovah's Witness, about everything that happened. She told me that I had something in my house that was causing the problems. I didn't fully believe it was the dolls at the time, but I ended up throwing them out in the industrial bin that weekend because something needed to happen to make this stop. The dolls were worth hundreds of dollars, but I wasn't risking it. That night, I had an extreme nightmare about them. The dolls were at my nan's house, where they had been originally, and they had killed my cat. In the dream, I found his body in the kitchen sink. My cat is still alive now, but I always check on him to make sure he's safe. It's been over 9 months now, and since getting rid of the dolls, I've had no nightmares, no weird noises, and no feelings of another presence. I feel stronger and healthier, and I always pray from time to time, asking the Lord to protect me and my cat. Everything stopped after I threw out those dolls. Now I know not to ignore things and to become more in touch with my spiritual side.
My car died a while back, and I've been using Lyfts to get around town if needed. I am within walking distance to a good variety of stores, so it hasn't been too pricey for me. However, I recently needed to go to the pharmacy and the pet supply store, both too far to walk. So I go to the pharmacy to pick up my prescription and call my ride to the pet supply store. The driver who picked me up seemed initially very polite, asking how my day was, commenting on the weather, etc. But things got weird very fast. He abruptly asked me if I was hungry. When I said no, he began to insist that we stop at a restaurant to get food and would not stop until I lied and said that I had just eaten a large lunch. Then he asked if I wanted to get coffee. Again, I said no. He backed off and turned up the radio. A minute later, he asked if I liked music and if I liked to dance. I answered that I don't care for dancing, to which he asked, well, why not? Then he asked if I liked to drink, and if so, what bars do I like? I felt very uncomfortable at this point and said I don't drink much. Well, why not? He asked again. Not even a little here and there? I lied. The alcohol makes me nauseous. But then he asked if I live alone. I said no, that I live with my husband. He asked how long I've been married and if I'm happy with my husband. Then he casually asked if my husband is a strong guy, if he hits the gym. I began to feel very panicked at this point. Why would this guy want to know if I live alone, or how physically strong my husband is? He was being very pleasant and cheerful the whole time, but staring intently at me through the rearview mirror, which disturbed me. I lied a third time that my husband was military, and that I was so happy to have him home with me. He became disinterested after I began gushing about my husband, and then briefly turned up the radio so loud it hurt my ears in the back seat. I'm not even kidding, the windows were vibrating from the noise. When we arrived at the pet store, I jumped out of the car and hurried away. Once in the store, I took my time near the entrance of the store to ensure that the driver had left. I stayed there nearly 40 minutes. It was rush hour, so I was fairly confident he had received another passenger request and left. After buying feed for my bunny, I headed out and requested another ride. I kid you not, dude was waiting in the parking lot and with his car out in front of me as soon as I walked out the door. He accepted my ride request after blocking me from walking into the parking lot. I jumped out of his car and took my bag of feed out of my hands and bundled it into the car. It all happened very quickly, and looking back, I should have canceled my ride right then and there. I regret not putting my foot down and calling him out on his creepiness. I freeze up and start panicking. I tell myself that I'm being dramatic, that it's all just a coincidence. I get in his car and realize with misery that my home address is logged into his GPS. He is very jolly now and asks if I'll be happy to get home. I had a stroke of genius and lied number 4 that I was visiting my friend for dinner. But oh yes, I can't wait to get home later on. It's been such a long day. He didn't seem to like hearing this and gave me the loud radio treatment again. I arrived home and grabbed my bag of bunny feeds so he wouldn't try to help me carry it inside. The driver got out when I did and tried to push a paper into my hand that had his phone number on it, and he said he'll call me tonight when you're ready to go home. Yes, your boy demanded that I call his personal phone to get a ride home after dinner with my friend. I refused, and he tried to force the paper into my hand, grabbing my fingers and crumpling them into a fist around set paper. I lied a 5th time that my friend was driving me home later and dropped the paper on the sidewalk. He finally gave up and got back into his car. I walked up to the door, but then realized that the driver was still parked at the curb watching me. He saw me looking and quickly pretended to mess with his phone. But I suspect he was waiting to see if my friend would come to the door, or if I was lying. I casually knocked on the door, waited a moment, then pulled out my phone as though to call my friend. While making the call, I decided to turn and stare pointedly at him. It worked, and he eventually eased his car out and away. Once he was around the corner, I rushed into the house and locked the door behind me. Thank God, that was the last I saw of him.
This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting with my extended family, but she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening just talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend was quite drunk by the time we had to leave, so obviously, I'd be driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so, and I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it are unlit, but nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. There's a part of the highway that descends down an enormous hill just before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forests. There are no lights. The only thing we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drove down the hill, crossed the bridge, and uphill through more forest. Just as the highway started to flatten out, it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turned to my girlfriend and asked her if she saw it. She confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote. They're a fairly common sight in this area, but something felt off about it. Whatever it was that ran in front of my car, it disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually just dart out in front of cars. Not like that anyway. So for some reason, I decided to check it out. I turned the car around and switched on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished into. I step out of the car and walk towards the woods. I don't see anything. But now it feels like perhaps I made a big mistake. My heart is pounding, and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention. But I still don't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly, the car's horn blasts. It's not a beep 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 that you'd get if, say, your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry up and get in the car. No, this was a long, blaring beep. I walked back into the car and asked my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked in that direction, and that's when I saw it. Surely, this was the thing that ran in front of the car. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud, and in one of his hands, he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us, and then he smiled and waved to us just before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he initially vanished into, he circled back around and came out from another spot in the forest, beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me, his hatchet raised, as if making to strike me. We called the authorities once we got safely back home, but they never found anybody. Or they did and just didn't tell us. But the officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting lone travelers for God knows what reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back into the area recently, so I now drive the highway often. No naked hatchet man sightings yet, but I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant, especially near Deep Creek.
This happened a few months ago. I'm a 23-year-old female, and I had finally bought a car for myself. I loved driving around and listening to music. I usually liked doing this by myself. On this night, it was around 7 p.m., and it was wintertime. On this particular drive, I took two of my siblings. My sister was 18, and my brother was 13. I took them along with me after their constant pleading because they were bored. Now, I'm a smoker, and coming from a South Asian household, women are not supposed to smoke. So I took these opportunities to smoke without worrying that my parents would catch me. The city that I live in has some bad areas. However, we lived in a quiet suburban area. So I didn't give a second thought about parking somewhere, getting out of my car, and lighting up a cigarette. I don't like smoking in my car. So there I was, parked beneath a street light, scrolling away on my phone. It was getting pretty dark, but I wasn't too worried about it, as I would visit this road frequently, and it wasn't too far from my aunt's house. As I was smoking my cigarette, I look up from my phone, and I see a man emerging from some bushes nearby. I didn't think much of it. I see people walking around here all the time. This man was very tall, standing at least 6'4". He was on the opposite sidewalk. I assumed that he was just going to carry on walking, so I looked back to my phone. Until I looked up again and saw him standing in front of my car, staring at me. My sister, who was still in the car, must have been watching him as well, because she knocked on the window, telling me to come in. I had already put out my cigarette and was making my way to the driver's side door, keys in hand. The man was still standing there, not moving a muscle. I got in and locked my door and breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that maybe I was just overreacting. As I put my keys in the ignition, I looked up to see where the guy was, but he was no longer standing in front of my car. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw that he was now standing behind us. He was taking pictures of my license plate. I slightly rolled down my window, and I could see his face a bit clearer now. He appeared to be an Indian man with a beard and a hoodie over his head, obscuring some of the features on his face. I asked him as politely as I could, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" The man comes towards my window, but still kept his distance. He then said in a very aggressive tone, "Do you know who I am?" I didn't know if he was asking a rhetorical question or not. "I have a lot of shit going on in my house. I don't need you parking here and watching me. You look real suspicious. Just randomly parking here with your two friends? What do you think you're doing? Get the fuck out of here." I chuckled nervously. I was trying to keep calm, but my anxiety was already halfway through the roof at this point. I didn't understand how I looked threatening in any way, as I'm a small girl who's been told that she looks like a kid. I was in my pajamas, and I was clearly minding my own business. "Look, I just parked here to smoke. I come here all the time since I live close by." That's when the man got right up to my window. He slid his fingers through the gap and forced my window all the way down, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Get the hell out of here!" I screamed in terror and told him to stop swearing, as I had a minor in the back seat and he was scaring him. He then screamed, "If you don't get out of here right now, I'll damage your fucking car!" My adrenaline was running at full speed, and I was terrified. I didn't even bother putting my seatbelt on. I bolted out of there, and in my panic, I went straight ahead at a junction. It led me to a dead end. As soon as I stopped my car, I took the opportunity to try and calm down. My whole body was shaking. I couldn't even keep my foot on the clutch. My sister was quick to ask me if I was okay. But before I could even answer, I saw a pair of headlights coming right for us. It was the man. He was going at least 50 on a 20, and he almost crashed right into my car, but by some miracle he just missed us. After his car screeched to a stop, he jumped out, and that's when I realized that my window was still all the way down. I quickly tried to roll my window back up, but the man was too quick. He then dove into my car. Half of his body was through my window. I screamed so loudly with his ear right next to my face that I'm sure I deafened him. He was trying to force my car keys from the ignition, but I thanked my lucky stars that with my car, to release the key, you had to have your foot on the clutch, which I didn't. With one hand, I was pressing down on the horn of my car to make as much noise as possible, so I could alert anyone who was nearby. I scratched his hands away from my car keys, and I heard my poor siblings crying their eyes out. My little brother had no idea what he could do to protect me. I finally managed to force the man out of my car, and that's when he started screaming again. "I thought I told you to get out of here. Now I'm going to fucking kill you, bitch!" The deranged man then attempted to pull my door handle, trying to get inside, and that's when I floored it the fuck out of there. I didn't care that my body was shaking like a fish out of water. My main priority was the safety of my siblings. I knew that we were making a loud commotion. I laid down on my horn, trying to get the attention of anyone nearby, but nobody came to help us. I managed to maneuver my way out of the dead end, and then went down a new street, into a totally different area, and I then parked. I knew that this was probably not a good idea, but I didn't see the guy following us. The three of us just sat in my car, sobbing away. This was the first time that anything like this has ever happened to us. I called the police, and I immediately wanted to punch myself in the face when the dispatcher asked if I had gotten the man's registration number. Of course, in my panic, I didn't. I wanted to slap myself in the face, because I listened to a lot of horror stories on YouTube, and I always felt that they taught me how to handle certain situations. The dispatcher was very understanding, as was the female officer who called me the next day. As a woman, she understood how scary it must have been for me, and I cried to her as I recounted the incident. Unfortunately, the cops informed me that there was no CCTV cameras in that area, so there wasn't really much that they could do, especially with me not knowing where he came from. If he did in fact come from one of the nearby houses, I didn't know which one. The officer apologized to me, but it was really my fault for not mentally noting important information. They made a report of my attack, so if a similar incident happens in that area, they can make the connection. The officer said that when I parked my car, the man was likely doing something illegal nearby, and that's why he freaked out on me. I personally think it was just some deranged individual who enjoyed scaring people who looked like easy prey.
This recent incident turned my life into a living nightmare. I'm still trying to recover from this trauma. I'm from California, and our college has always been a fun place for all the students. Even though we picked on each other a bit, no one ever did anything as harmful as this. Maybe that's why no one expected it to happen, and kept on playing the current trending online game, Among Us. Joining college after a long-lived quarantine came like bliss to us, but due to the protection measures of COVID-19, our football coach canceled our practices until December. You can now imagine how a bunch of locker room boys got a handful of time to kill after school. So, we all decided to do a bit of online gaming, sitting at our school cafeteria using the time slot of our football practice. For those who don't know about this game yet, let me give you a brief idea. It's a game one can play with friends online, adding your friend by sharing a private passkey. For those who want to play alone, you can also go for a public search to play with other unknown players. The game is a task-based murder mystery. There are two kinds of players in this game, crewmates and an imposter. The crewmates finish the tasks in a space station, and the imposter takes chances to execute them silently. After discovering the body of the murdered crewmate, an emergency meeting takes place, and everyone has to vote who is the imposter. The game continues if they fail to spot the imposter. Long story short, we were a group of 10 guys, hence we were enough to play privately, without seeking other unknown players online. The game allows you to increase the number of imposters, but we decided to keep only one for the game to become interesting. The game has created its avatar in such a way that, except the player, no one can guess which avatar belongs to whom, and we all decided to keep it a secret for the enjoyment purpose. The first day after school, we all jumped on the game. The game was going well. We had 2 rounds of emergency meetings, as the imposter wasn't making any moves. Everyone started to make fun of the imposter, without knowing who it was, by saying, "What a dork, dude. Seems like the imposter is too scared to take a life virtually. The imposter is making things boring," etc. I stared at everyone's face but couldn't guess who was the imposter, though after the end of the game, we were informed about his avatar, that no one revealed the imposter's identity. The next day, due to rainy weather, we left the school early and decided to play the game from our houses by sharing the passkey. The imposter managed to murder 7 crewmates without getting caught. Everyone got back their interest in the game. No one revealed the avatar of the imposter for obvious reasons. At the end of the game, we came to know a blue-colored crewmate was the imposter, but to keep the fun going, we decided not to reveal our avatars, so no one could guess who was whom. I went to bed thinking, who could be the imposter, and eventually fell asleep. When I woke up that following morning, I heard my dad talking to our college principal on the phone. I went downstairs and asked him, "What happened, Dad?" He replied in a worried voice, "One of your friends died last night. The school boards are calling every parent and warning us to keep caution. The cops think he was murdered mysteriously." I was beyond terrified to hear the news. I quickly called my friends and came to know it was Liam. He went to the backyard to dump the garbage at night, and someone silently came and slit his throat. The game Among Us also allows the imposter to kill the crewmates with a sharp, pointy knife. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know why the game came into my mind after hearing the details about Liam's murder. If I stayed on this gut feeling that day, I might have been able to lessen the damage. But our school organized a little ceremony to pay our condolences to Liam's family and pray for his soul to be in peace. The group of 10 became a group of 9. A few days passed, and we were all starting to get back to normal life. One evening, I was sitting at home bored when a friend suggested playing Among Us to kill time. Though everyone was quite upset with Liam's mysterious death, we all thought it would be a nice way to keep our minds preoccupied for a while. We started the game, and after 2 rounds of play, things were the same again. After winning his crewmates on that 3rd round, I felt the pattern repeating itself. The imposter now behaving exactly like that, killing people randomly and managing to win the game by lying in our emergency chat. This time, I asked the group chat who played the imposter in the 3rd round. Chris and Jack revealed they played the imposter in the first 2 rounds, but when asked about the 3rd round, everyone said it wasn't them. I feel someone among us was lying, but I didn't know why. Something about this was feeling odd. I told my friends I didn't want to play anymore and left the game. After that day, the actual horror began. My friends started to die mysteriously. Chris was found dead in our school library. His throat was slit too. Blood gushed out from his neck and stained the floor red. It was a vicious sight when his body was discovered. Then it was Sam. He went for a swim in our school swimming pool. A couple of cheerleaders found him floating in a pool of his own blood. Cause of death: someone slit his throat. After 3 horrible deaths of our friends, we all shook in fear. We stopped going out after school or roaming around the streets. One day, Jack frantically came to see me. He seemed really nervous and panicked. I asked him, "What is it?" He said in a broken voice, "I think someone from our group is the imposter." I couldn't understand it at first, so I asked him, "What do you mean?" He said, "Don't you get it? Someone is playing the role of a real imposter among us. It's one of us who is not playing this game in real life, but also enjoying it." A chilling sensation went down my spine. Jack and I decided to see the principal the next day and tell him about all of this. I went to school and waited for Jack to arrive. We didn't tell our friends, as we didn't want to freak them out as well. After a while, I saw Jack walking towards me. I waved at him. He came to see me and said, "I called our principal. He said he will see us within an hour. Until then, I have to go to the library and return some books." I had nothing to do but wait, so I decided to accompany him. We went to the library. It was empty, as kids these days hardly come here. Jack pointed towards the last shelf on the left corner and started walking towards it. He told me to hold his backpack as his hands were filled with books already. As he got busy keeping his books, I decided to surf on my phone for a while. So I put his bag on the table near me, and as the bag hit the table, I heard a heavy metal sound, as if something in his bag clanked with the table's surface. Out of curiosity, I opened his bag, and what I saw, it stopped my heart immediately. Jack was carrying a sharp kitchen knife. It had blood stains on it. I looked up to him with trembling eyes. He was still busy arranging the books. He turned towards me and said, "Max, come over here and help me real quick. Bring my bag for me too. I have some books in it." I knew what was going to happen next. I knew he wanted to lure me by going to him, so that he can slit my throat like Liam and Chris. I didn't wait for a second and ran to the principal's office with his backpack in my hand. The cops showed up at our campus. They discovered blood-stained clothes from Jack's locker. Jack was handcuffed and taken into police custody. We all watched him as he walked slowly to the police car. Before getting inside, he turned to us and said, in a creepy voice, "Trust me guys, it's so much more fun in real life." The Jack I saw at that moment, that wasn't my friend. His smile put me on edge. I almost became numb with fear. Jack is now in a mental institution. Doctors think over-obsession to this online game is what led him to commit these horrible murders. It's more disturbing to think how a game changed my friend. I believe this is why people say too much of anything is not good. Be careful, guys. It's really hard to identify the imposter in real life. Don't let an online game influence you in such a manner that you end up ruining your life forever.
I was about 10 years old. There was a small wooden house next to our schoolyard. That house belonged to an old man named Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith stayed in the house with his old wife. His wife loved children, maybe because they didn't have any of their own. All the kids called her Trick-or-Treat Granny. Every year, during the night of Halloween, she used to give all the kids lots and lots of candies, more than any other person living in our area. Every Halloween night, my friends and I used to run to her house and get as much candy as we could. She was old, but always smiling. Every year at Halloween night, she used to sit on her house porch with buckets of candy and give them away to every passing child. The town loved her for spoiling little kids. Mr. Smith also smiled at us whenever we went there. Perhaps he liked watching Miss Smith being happy while seeing all these kids. A week before Halloween, I went to buy groceries with my mom. She told me to get her some apples from the fruit basket, which was on the left corner of the small local store. I went there and started taking apples into my trolley, just when I felt someone standing behind me. As I turned back, I saw it was Trick-or-Treat Granny. She stood behind me, waiting her turn to get fruits. I always felt happy whenever I saw her, as she smelled like candy all the time. But this time, I didn't feel that way. Granny's eyes were a bit puffy, surrounded by dark circles. She smiled at me, but her smile was full of pain. My mom noticed us and came to talk to her. We came to know that she's not well these days. My mom waited till she finished her grocery shopping, and we gave her a lift home. When we reached her house, we saw Mr. Smith standing at the gate with a very angry face. Granny got out of the car and walked slowly towards him. We heard Mr. Smith yelling, "The doctors told you not to leave the house and take rest. Why don't you listen to me?" I overheard Granny replying, "Halloween is coming. I had to buy candy for the kids. I am all fine, don't worry." I felt grateful, thinking how much she loves us, that she went to buy candy for us, even in this bad health condition. After this incident, a few things started to become weird. Whenever we used to walk to school, we would notice Trick-or-Treat Granny sitting at our porch with her knitting wool and waving at us. But the next day, we didn't see her there. Not even the day after tomorrow. We came across Mr. Smith 3 or 4 times, but he was always busy going somewhere. 2 days before Halloween, I went to the playground to play with my friends. On our way back, we took the road near Granny's house, just to check to see if she was sitting on the porch or not. As we reached the house, we saw Mr. Smith rushing to the house with another man who seemed like a doctor. We realized that Granny is still sick, and we all felt a bit sad for her. The Halloween fever took over our town, as every shop and hangouts started to get dressed in Halloween decoration. But just before 2 days of Halloween, we all came to know that Granny was being hospitalized for serious heart trouble. Mr. Smith had to stay with her in the hospital. Every kid got really sad, realizing Halloween will not be the same without her. But I prayed to God for her recovery and decided to visit her after she comes back. It was the day before Halloween. My mother took me to the store to buy my Halloween costume. I always wanted to dress as Superman, so my mom bought me the magical-looking blue and red Superman costume. As I came back home, me and my dad started to put up all the Halloween decorations. After a tiring evening of work and excitement, I went to bed and fell asleep. At night, I had a very peculiar dream. I saw Trick-or-Treat Granny sitting at our house porch with candies in her palm and calling me saying, "Come here, come on." She was smiling, but her eyes looked the same as that day on the grocery store. I woke up and realized it was morning time. The final day of Halloween came. Our long-distance relatives came to our house, hence, everyone was busy having a fun time. Being among all those people, I forgot about the dream. In the evening, my school friends came wearing their Halloween costumes. We were all looking funny. I got into my Superman costume and went out to collect candies with my friends. Every kid was busy collecting candies. My friends and I also went to the nearby houses and started collecting candies. The last house in our neighborhood was connected with our way to school. After collecting the candies from that house, my friends decided to head back home. I needed to pee badly, as I remembered drinking 2 cans of orange juice before leaving the house. I told my friend to start walking and that I will catch up eventually. Now, you can all understand peeing wearing a Superman costume was a tough job. I walked to the corner of the street and helped myself, which took me enough time. After finishing, when I looked up, I saw my friends were already gone. I lifted the candy bucket in my hand and decided to head home too. Just when I was about to turn, I noticed a flash of light coming from my right side. As the school road laid ahead on my right, I could see Granny's house in some distance. Being the only house near school, it wasn't that difficult to spot for anyone. What seemed strange to me was the house light was on. I knew there was no one in the house, then how come the room lights are on? I was a brave kid, hence, I thought to check it out. I was curious too. I walked towards the house, and as I reached the front door, I heard footsteps inside the house. I knocked on the door and said, "Anyone inside?" I thought it might be some stranger breaking into their house. But the response I got shocked me. I heard Trick-or-Treat Granny's voice. She said in a mellow voice, "Come on. I am waiting for you with candies." I was more than happy to know that she came back all well. I pushed the door open and entered the house. I have never been inside this house, so seeing it for the first time made me a bit shy. There was a couch on the dining in front of a TV set, and stairs were leading up to the second floor. I said in a loud voice, "Granny, where are you?" She muttered from upstairs, "Come up, kid. I am here." I walked up the stairs following her voice. As I kept walking, she kept talking. "I am waiting for so long, but no other kid came. Glad you came. I bought so many candies. Come and have it." As I reached upstairs, I saw a room at the end of the hallway. Pale yellow light was coming out from that room. I walked inside and saw Trick-or-Treat Granny laying on the bed, facing her back towards me. I could see that her body has become extremely lean, as if she has lost a huge amount of weight in just a few days. I guessed it was because of her sickness. She didn't turn towards me. Instead, lifted her long, lean arm, grabbing a handful of candies. "Come to this side. I am not well. I can't move much," she said in a frail voice. I felt like her voice was coming from a long distance, though she was lying just in front of my eyes. She started to laugh in that voice, and I felt something was odd. A feeling rushed down my spine that suddenly told me I shouldn't be here. I told her, "You take a rest today. I will come back some other time. Also, it's late. I probably should go home now." I was just about to leave when I heard a huge thumping sound on the wooden floor, as if someone jumped on the ground from a higher place. I turned back and my skin crawled. The blood in my veins clotted. I couldn't believe my eyes. Granny was sitting on the floor like a frog. Saliva was dripping out of her mouth. Her eyes were blood red. She gave me a terrifying smile and said in a demonic voice, "Trick or treat," and started hopping towards me violently. I ran for my life. I even tripped on the stairs and hit my head. I was bleeding, but I didn't stop. I could hear the loud thuds of Granny jumping on the wooden floor as she chased me. As soon as I got out of the house, I slammed the front door behind me and ran away. I woke in the morning on my bed. My mom and dad got really worried as I didn't come home with my friends. They came looking for me and found me on the way to our house. I was lying unconscious on the road. After waking up, it all felt like a nightmare. But when my mom asked me what happened, I told them everything. I saw the look on their face changing as I told them all the details. When I finished, my mom hugged me to her chest and started crying loudly. My dad didn't say a word and left the room quietly. My parents didn't give any reason behind this reaction until I grew up. I came to know that Trick or Treat Granny passed away on Halloween evening due to a heart attack. They heard from Mr. Smith that she was in a lot of pain when she died. Her tongue came out of her mouth with saliva dripping from it. Her eyes turned all red from the blood clotting under her pupils. I didn't talk for an hour after hearing this. I felt sorry for her, thinking how much pain she has to go through on her last days. But I will never be able to forget that horrible side of her. Till today, on Halloween nights, I feel scared that she might come to visit me again.
So, I don't know where to start with this. I've never shared my story or stories with anyone other than my close friend. I don't want anyone thinking I'm crazy. Anyways, it was around Christmas time when this all happened. My friend and I were really into Ouija boards, but never had the balls to buy one. Even if I did get one, my parents would pretty much disown me. My family isn't super religious, but they definitely believed in the Ouija board enough to know how powerful it could be. So, as I was saying, this happened around Christmas time. My friend came over to celebrate with my family since he wasn't too close with his. He took me aside and we exchanged gifts. He opened his first. I had gotten him a couple of movies he'd been wanting. When it was my turn to open my gift, he stopped me before I could even read the label. He said, "Make sure your mom doesn't see it." Immediately I knew what he had gotten me. I opened it and there it was, my very own Ouija board. We had a Christmas cake at my place, then went to a bar nearby. After we were done, my friend offered to give me a ride. He dropped me off. I went inside, changed into some comfortable clothes, and set up the Ouija board. I've watched YouTube and read enough of other people's experiences that I knew I didn't want to play it by myself. I called one of my other friends who was looking for something to do. After what seemed like forever, she finally showed up. Let me tell you, she was not happy when she saw the Ouija board. I didn't tell her what we were going to do because I knew she wouldn't show up if I did. Eventually, I conned her into playing it with me. She only agreed to play if I asked all the questions. We sat across from each other with the board in between us. Our Christmas tree was on my left-hand side, and towards the middle of the tree, there was an ornament that looked like a little girl. She's dressed in a green cloak-type thing with a Sherpa-lined hood. My sister has a similar one, but hers is pink. Anyways, I started off with the usual opening of the circle. One of the first questions I asked was, "Is there anyone here with us?" Nothing. I then felt like something was in the room with us. I took a breath and said, "If there's anything here, move an ornament on the tree." Nothing. I said once more, "If there's anything here, move an ornament on the tree." After that, I closed my eyes for a split second when I felt the slightest breeze. Out of the corner of my eye, I see my ornament spinning counterclockwise. My friend is quick to take her hands off the planchette, and I yell at her to put her fingers back because you're never supposed to break the circle. She said she's done playing the stupid game, so I agreed to say goodbye. She leaves, I lock the door behind her, and I pack up the board. As soon as I close the box, I get a phone call. My mom is outside waiting for me to help her bring things upstairs. I rush to find a hiding spot for the board because no one knew that I had it. I quickly throw it under my bed so I could deal with it later. My mom then informs me she's going to my aunt's to spend the night, so I'll be home alone. I was a little scared about what just happened, so I called my friend asking if I could spend the night at her house. Thank goodness she didn't leave yet. I packed a few things, got my coat, and left with her. What I didn't know was, later that night, my family came back home because my sister wasn't feeling too well. She had slept in my bed since I wasn't home. The next morning when I returned, my mom looked exhausted. I asked her if she was all right. She replied, "Your sister came to my room terrified and screaming. She didn't tell you?" I said, "No, what happened?" My mom went on to say, "Your sister had a horrible nightmare. She said someone or something killed your dad. She wouldn't stop shaking and refused to sleep in your room." My eyes opened so wide. Something told me to go look under my bed, and sure enough, I was right. The lid to the box from the Ouija board was slightly open. No one knew I had it. I never asked my sister about her nightmare. After that, weird things started happening around the house. All I know is, I will never play with another Ouija board again.
This happened today, and I'm still freaked out about the whole experience. I'm going to include all the things that happened leading up to this point to provide some context, though this would be bad enough on its own. I work at a kid's toy store where I originally felt safe from creeps, as I've had some in the past in the food industry where I feel there is more exposure to different varieties of people. This is the kind of store with more expensive toys that you buy every once in a while and on occasion. We don't really get too many regulars, so no matter who you are, if you come in more than 2 times, we take note of you, for various reasons. It's also in the mall near where I live, which I think is important to note. About 6 months into my employment, there was a man who came in with his daughter. No big deal. I interacted with them like I would with any customer. Right off the bat, the father seemed off. I don't know if he was drunk, tired. He said they had a long drive, but why would you go shopping if you're that tired? Or just strange. I was a bit uncomfortable, more for his daughter's safety getting home, but I tried to just get through the encounter and make a sale so they would leave. He started to hit on me blatantly, making my discomfort go through the roof. Something about how aggressive he was being, especially in front of his young daughter, with someone who was obviously a lot younger than him, was alarming to me. He was continually asking about if I had a boyfriend, why I wasn't settled down yet, if he could take me out or get my number. He was relentless. I wasn't sure if I was being just overly paranoid, so I tried to continue about my business as he went to look at a couple more things with his daughter before checking out. I set out to go stock the shelves a bit to keep my distance. After he lingered a bit, trying to catch my attention all the while, he finally caught on to my avoidance and checked out. My manager, who was the cashier at the moment, came over to tell me how he was discussing various inappropriate things about my body and what he wanted to do to me in front of his daughter still. We were both disgusted, but tried to brush it off and finish the shift. Fast forward to 2 or 3 weeks later, Creepy Dad, as we've come to call him, returns with his daughter. He corners me to try to ask for suggestions on products, and I rush to tell him random things before escaping to the back room. I found some stuff to do back there and stayed there until my manager came back, eyes wide. She said he had took his time finally getting to check with his daughter and her toys. He then proceeded to wander around about with her, looking around like he was looking for someone. She thought he was waiting around to see if I was still there, but left when I hadn't come back in a long time. I was a little scared, but I figured if he was gone, I was safe. The next time he came in was about a month later. I saw him walk and start to browse, so I tried to go in the back before he had a chance to see me and decide to extend his stay. I hid back there until the manager came to see where I was. When she confirmed he left, I returned to the front, thinking I was safe again. A half an hour of mindlessly doing work, I look out into the mall to people watch since it wasn't that busy. Creepy Dad was sitting outside with his daughter, eating ice cream. This wouldn't be that unusual if his eyes weren't burning into me. I quickly tried to avoid his gaze and move closer to the back of the store and not be able to be seen as well. He stayed there for another hour or so before getting up to start walking the mall. I couldn't shake the anxiety I felt and soon found out why. The location of our store is in a wider opening of the mall that is more oval in shape than the rectangular expanses of the rest of it. This is because it's the center of the mall, and contained some more stores than the 2 other straightways of the rest of the mall. Sorry, I don't know how to describe it without posting a picture and giving away my location and work. Maybe I'll try to draw it later. This makes it easier to make full rounds in this middle part. Creepy Dad was continually passing the store slowly, then picking up speed to walk the rest of the way around. He kept it pretty natural until he got to my store, then slowed down to a pace that would look almost like he was window shopping, except he was looking directly at me. He did this for about an hour or so. I'm not sure. I tried to ignore it as best as I could. He eventually disappeared, and I was hoping this would be the last time I would see him. It was about a month and a half until today, when I came in a bit rushed to my shift. I jumped into action, as it was a bit busier today than usual. In the middle of me helping a customer, the manager comes over to tell me to stay with this family because Creepy Dad was back. A sense of dread washed over me, and I struggled to stay calm and appear okay. I saw over the customer's shoulders those same eyes burning into me. He was watching me so intensely, I felt the need to shift my weight, so the customer I was with cut his line of sight off. I played it cool, but I didn't feel any drip of relief until I saw him checking out. I was hoping the busyness of today would be a good buffer from his creepiness. The shift went fine, and I didn't give Creepy Dad another thought. I clocked out and started to head out of the mall. I usually take a back hallway out to get to the parking lot. When I get outside, I started heading to the lot and noticed there was someone outside smoking a cigarette by a different exit not too far away. Nothing too unusual, but I always try to be observant. As I was heading away from the door, the person put out the cigarette and started to walk the same way. That was a huge red flag, and I picked up my pace, fishing through my pockets for my keys. In the corner of my eye, I could see the person speed up as well. At this point, I was done and just wanted to go home, and I ran for my car since it wasn't that far away, keys in hand. I fumbled with my keys a bit, of course, and jumped into my car, locking the door immediately. I look out my window and see the man was maybe 2 feet behind me and now was standing outside of my car, seeming to contemplate his next move. Out of fear, I was frozen, staring at him. After who knows how long of staring, I realized it was none other than the Creepy Dad. I started to panic and started my car, hoping he'd take the hint and go away. He started to creepily smile. It felt predatory, like he enjoyed my fear. He then abruptly turned and quickly walked off down the line of cars. I drove home as fast as I could, taking an extra 30 minutes to take random turns so I could make sure I wasn't being followed. After tonight, I cannot assume he's some lonely, bitter single dad who doesn't understand the dating game anymore. It scares me that he's using, intentionally or not, his daughter as bait or a part of his sick pickup game. I don't know how he knew where I park or when I got off. He does always seem to know when I work, because that's the only time anyone I work with sees him in the store. I don't know if I should call the police or not, but I really hope that I won't see him again. If I do, I will definitely update if there is any interest. This happened a few years ago, but I still think about it to this day. I was on holiday in a city on the other side of the country, celebrating my 21st birthday with my best friend. We were having an amazing night out with a few too many drinks, and ended up meeting 2 guys. Let's call them Andrew and Billy. They seemed like really cool guys, and we were into them, so when they asked us to go back to their hotel room, we said yes. Obviously a silly idea, but we were young and drunk. Things were great on the way back to the hotel room. We were all laughing and having a great time. When we got to the hotel room, there were 2 other men there as well. Let's call them Ricky and JD, who were at least 10 to 15 years older than us. They gave us creepy vibes, but we brushed it off. We asked Andrew and Billy who these guys were, and they said that they were colleagues, as they were in the city for work, and the company paid for their rooms. So Andrew and Billy were in different rooms, but we were all partying in Andrew's room that he shared with Ricky. I got a little too drunk, and my friend put me to bed. She said she was going to Billy's room and asked if it would be okay with Andrew, and I said yes. Keep in mind, my friend didn't have a phone either, so we basically had no way of getting in contact with each other. Another stupid thing, I know. So I'd been in bed for a while with Andrew, just talking and chilling, when he says, "I just have to pop out and I'll be right back." I assumed he meant just out of the bedroom, not out of the actual hotel room, but he left the hotel room to get something from Billy's hotel room. Anyway, I was just watching TV in the bed when the bedroom door opens, and I assumed it was Andrew. But my heart sank when it was Ricky, the weird colleague. He walked into the room and sat on the bed. Keep in mind, I'm very naked at this point, trying to cover myself with the blanket. He said, "You do realize that everyone has left you alone in here, right? It's just you all alone. No one is here, and no one can hear you," and continued edging closer and closer to me on the bed. At this point, I was completely speechless and absolutely terrified. I was completely frozen in fear, and I had no idea what to do. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. He definitely sensed my fear, and for some reason, he just got up and left. A sense of relief flooded me, and I felt silly for overreacting. That was until I heard JD, other random colleague, shouting, "Get the fuck back in there! What are you doing? This isn't what we discussed. Get the fuck back in there and do what you were meant to do. Who gives a fuck about that whore? Just get back in there and do what you need to do." I ran to the bathroom and locked myself in because I was so scared, but there was no way out, and the only way out of the hotel room was through the front door, and I had to walk past Ricky and JD to get there. I was so terrified. I had a million thoughts rushing through my head, and I had no idea what to do, but I knew I had to escape. I decided my only option was to just leave the room and be ready to defend myself if things were to go pear-shaped. I threw my clothes on and grabbed my shoes. I opened the door, and Ricky and JD were sitting on a couch close to the bedroom door. JD said, "Hey, sexy, where are you going in such a rush? Come and join us. Come here right now." I said, "No thanks," and ran to the front door and ripped it open. When I got out, I was so relieved, but I was still in a random hotel in a random city with no way to contact my friend. But I thought my best option was to go to the lobby and just wait. As I was walking, I heard two men yelling down the hall, "Where are you? We know you aren't too far away. Come back and join us. You know you want to." It was Ricky and JD. I was absolutely fucking terrified by this point. I began sprinting to the elevator. I could hear them gaining on me. I never knew I could run so fast, but I just continued and didn't look back. I felt like I was running forever until I reached the end of the corridor, and my worst nightmare had come true. I missed the turn off of the elevator. Fucking idiot, ha ha ha. So I had to turn and run back towards where I could hear Ricky and JD still yelling down the hallway. I found the elevator and got in. I could hear their voices getting louder and louder, and I didn't want to imagine what would happen if they got into the elevator with me. The door finally closed after what felt like a lifetime. I thought I would go down to the lobby and just wait there, because at least there would be people there, so there would be some form of safety. I got to the lobby and realized that there was no one in sight. No one at all, not even behind the desk. I sat on a couch and didn't know what to do with myself. I was absolutely terrified that Ricky and JD would come to the lobby. Then I heard the elevator ding and the door open. My heart dropped. But it was Andrew. I told him what had happened, and he was outraged that his colleagues did that, and he took me to where my best friend was. Everything turned out fine, but it could have been a lot worse. So Ricky and JD, let's never meet again. This story begins in 8th grade. For context, I am a white female and was struggling with really bad depression and self-harm, 7th grade to 10th. 2 years clean. Depression had a big impact on my memory, so some sections of my childhood, and this time, is completely blank, so this is as close as I can remember it, but that might not be 100% accurate. At the end of 8th grade, one of my close male friends, Tom, invited me to his birthday party. There was about 10 guys there, and me and my best friend, female. I knew about 9 of the guys there, but one I didn't recognize. This party took place in a garden playground. We played hide-and-go-seek, tag, and capture the flag with fake swords. As the sun began to set, Tom wanted to play hide-and-go-seek in the dark. There was a dark tunnel that went from the play structure to the rest of the park. A majority of us started to run to the tunnel to go hide. Suddenly, halfway through, hands shot out and tried to grab people's ankles. I tripped and landed on my hands and knees. The second my hands hit the ground, a foot hit my legs as I tripped someone else. The hands in the dark laughed as Tim's friends came out from the dark. The person who tripped over me turned out to be the person I had never met. We went to a bench right outside the tunnel to check for wounds and patch ourselves up. We got acquainted, and he introduced himself as Davidson Whitaker III. He was polite, kind, and easy on the eyes. We had some stuff in common. His birthday was the same as my father's, and he was outgoing and an extrovert, exactly what I needed to be a more rounded person. The rest of the night was a blur, but we spent most of the night talking. As the party was coming to an end, and people's parents were coming to pick them up, he asked for my number in addition to my best friend's. He did it in a way that he only really wanted my number, but wanted to be polite. He never seemed creepy in doing this. He wasn't unsettling. He was just a cute boy asking for my number. Davidson, or as he let me call him, Davis, and I spent the next month or so texting almost non-stop every day. I felt beautiful and wanted. It was comforting. At some point, we became more than friends. We were suddenly dating, but I never wanted to go on a date. I think he convinced me to go on some date as a group to some movie, but I don't remember it. The only proof I have of this exchange is a ticket stub and his word. He finally convinced me to go on a real date. I wore some jean shorts and a t-shirt. He chose the location of a museum in the city. If you know me, you wouldn't know there's only 3 museums I like in the whole world, and I hate normal museums. As a kid, my mom forced me to go to all of them whenever we traveled, and I got sick of them quickly. He picked me up from my house and now knew where I lived. I didn't think anything of it at the time. After we went to the museum, I went out to dinner with him and my mom at my favorite Thai place. I even have an awkward photo to remember that moment by. After the date, however, he sent me lewd thoughts he had that whole date with me. He had attempted sexting before, but I wasn't that involved. I'd send a yeah or a daddy every 20 lines or so. I've always been a people pleaser in both ways and just wanted him to be happy. But this time felt off. It felt real. I couldn't pretend someone else was sexting him. It was about me, and I didn't like that. It made me feel uncomfortable, and so I just buried that feeling deep. This was the first thing that felt off about him. After that, things got worse. I wanted space sometimes, and he didn't like that. I would take a 30-minute shower and get back to 50 to 100 messages from him. He started to make it racial. He is African American, and kept on talking about how I needed some of his cocoa. My family is from the Deep South, so anything racial makes me deeply uncomfortable. His messages got more explicit. He would detail any wet dream he had about me, and how it made him feel. It all made me so uncomfortable. Finally, I had had enough. I told him it was over, and we needed to stop. It had only been about 2 to 3 months, but I couldn't take it anymore. I said no. He argued. He said it wasn't fair. He said I needed him. He said he cared about me. He said I was the only one. I said no again. That didn't matter to him. We were meant to be, and my no meant nothing to him. That scared me. I told him I wouldn't feel safe anymore around him, and how much I hated what he was doing. I told him that I wasn't comfortable anymore because he didn't know the meaning of no, because I was scared he was going to rape me. He said he'd never hurt me. I told him to stay away from me. From my house. He showed up at my doorstep. My parents invited him in because they thought we were still dating. I was so ashamed it wasn't working out that I just couldn't say anything. He stayed for food before I was able to get him out. I told my parents shortly after he left to never let him return. He continued with the one-sided sexting. He sent nudes. He sent 13 red roses when I didn't talk to him for a week. I threw the roses out the window. I've always hated flowers because they die too quickly, but he never bothered to ask. He showed up at my doorstep again even when I begged him not to. My dad told him through the door to go away as I cowered in our living room. He scared me so much. I was never safe. Every guy around his height with his haircut gave me a fright. I was terrified he would see me and rape me. I got a boyfriend freshman year, John, a timid guy who I could break if I hugged him too hard. John's heart was made of gold. He made me feel safe. Yet, Davis persisted. He texted me daily, begging me to stop cheating. He thought we had been dating this whole time. I tried everything, besides disengaging. I told him I was gay now. Not entirely wrong. I told him I was transitioning to male. He is very straight, and this was never meant to belittle trans individuals. Yet, what shook him the most was when I gave myself an undercut. Not my hair! He traded it like I was damaging his property. This persisted. Unrelated to him, I went to a therapeutic boarding school end of freshman year. I got the help and support I needed because I had tried to kill myself during freshman year. I got better and off my depression meds. I was gone from technology and texting for 13 months and 12 days. I thought I was better when I came back, that I had matured and could handle him. I messaged him August 20th, beginning of junior year, that I thought we could work it out. Almost verbatim, he said, "All those other girls meant nothing. You were the only one for me." And he also said that we had been dating since that night in 8th grade. I was naive, and I thought I was in control, so we tried to make it work it out. I had 2 rules. 1, you will never ever see me in person. 2, I initiate when we talk. I still felt scared of him, and these rules made me feel safe. He told me he drove by my house every time he went to swim practice, and that he missed me. I was having none of it. I said he had 3 chances and it was over, but he probably broke them 20 times. Junior year, September, I got back with John. He made me feel safe. I told him about Davis, and he was nicer than he should have been about my mistakes with him. We laughed at the stuff Davis said, but deep down I was scared. I am scared. I had enough when I was scrolling back through our old messages. I said no, and he replied, "But my cock says yes." I told him I was done, and I blocked him in November. I unblocked him on Valentine's Day, and he sent about 20 messages of how much he missed me, and the exact day count since I had last talked to him. It scared me. I blocked him immediately without replying. My 18th birthday was riddled with fear, because I told Davis that I wouldn't have sex with him until I was 18 because of morals or whatever. That's what I thought at the time, but now I know it was just fear. He knows my school. He knows my address. My current best friend is trained in martial arts and self-defense for a decade, so I hung to her all day. What should have been an exciting day of adulthood was riddled with fear that he would show up. I haven't unblocked him since last Valentine's Day. I haven't talked to him in almost a year and a half. Yet, I'm still scared some days. Scared that the man who is obsessed with me is right around the corner. When I was 5 years of age, we took a road trip, as was common in our family, up to upstate New York to see my grandmother on my father's side, as well as to tour around the countryside a bit. There we were in rural upstate, away from the region in which my grandmother actually lives, and we were planning on staying in a bed and breakfast my father had booked ahead of time. It had been an unexpectedly long drive due to weather complications, and when we found the B&B in question, we were all quite tired. We went up to the door to check in, and a woman missing her 2 front teeth on both jaws answered. She invited us in, but warned us that they didn't have any rooms for the night. They were booked solid. My father protested that he had made the arrangements in advance, but she said she knew another hotel that had vacancies just up the way, and she would give them a call, and she assured him they would offer the same rates. But first, she insisted on showing my parents around, as her husband was an artist, and she wanted to show them his studio and famous artwork. We were all invited in, but after seeing the first few pieces of naked women, missing their front teeth, bound, or being tortured in various ways, my parents opted to leave the kids outside with Grandma. Apparently, most of the rooms were full to the ceilings with similarly foreboding images of dead or dying people, with the occasional sculpture of menacing animals. My parents were a bit creeped out, but just figured these people were eccentric, and they had dodged a bullet by ending up somewhere else. We all waited out back while the woman called her friend, beside a pit containing what could have been nothing other than an altar, covered with pentagrams. My mother mentioned that it seemed strange, that not only had they not met the husband, who was supposedly there somewhere, having toured the entire house, but there hadn't been a single sign of life or piece of luggage suggesting that anyone else was actually staying in any of the guest bedrooms in the supposedly fully booked B&B. A side note that's probably not worth mentioning, but that I found strange when my mother brought it up while telling the story later, as I was 5 at the time. A lot of this story has been narrated to me after the fact by different people who were involved on some level, was that we stopped by a park to stretch our legs at some point before proceeding to the next place. The storm was closing in on us, and my parents wanted to be sure we had zero energy upon arrival. While in this park, my mother claims that one of us found and brought to her a small package with a pendant on it. The pendant was a pentagram on one side, with the Third Reich symbol on the other. My mother took it away and put it in her purse. We arrived at the next bed and breakfast to be greeted by a different woman, also conspicuously missing her front 2 teeth, upper and lower. It was about this time that my grandmother mentioned that she had read a lot of articles recently about tourists being killed by some cult of Satanists or some such in this area. Great. She tended to tell a lot of tall tales, so I think my parents kind of rolled their eyes and dismissed it, but they made a point to mention it later. The storm was now upon us. We were all exhausted, and there was nowhere else to stay that we could find anywhere near there. My dad decided we would make do with whatever they had to offer. What they had to offer was a slightly renovated barn. During the bustle of moving our luggage in, the woman kept inviting my brother, 3, and I into the house, saying she had some sweets and wouldn't we like to meet her kiddies. She made it clear, however, that my parents were not welcome into the house because it was too messy and she would be embarrassed. We were herded away into the barn and told not to talk to the lady. Once inside, my father, who was by this time a bit creeped out, went about checking the beds and securing the one-room barn unit. The windows had no coverings whatsoever, and the doors had no locks. We placed pillows from the couches in the window frames, and my dad grabbed a dresser against one wall to block the door. When he went to move the dresser, he discovered it was on wheels, which was completely silent. He also noticed that the wall behind it moved a little when he shifted the dresser. When he scrutinized the wall, he found a seam. He pushed on the wall and it gave way. 2 invisible doors opening outwards into the night, and just outside was a dark-colored van which had been backed up to the opening. Livid, my dad went about rearranging all the furniture in the room, stacking the heaviest against the outward swinging doors, and moving the mobile dresser with various loud objects behind it against the main door. When he had completed this, and we were all starting to settle down, at about 11 p.m., the woman brought us fresh-baked blueberry muffins. Now, as I mentioned before, I don't remember much of this trip, but this is one element I have a vivid recollection of. With the inclement weather and the rush to find a place to stay, complemented by the lack of restaurants, nigh anything, in the area, we hadn't had what one might consider a proper meal. When you're 5, dinner is very important. The muffins were fresh-baked and smelled heavenly. I wanted one more than I wanted anything else in the world. However, presuming, probably correctly, that they were poisoned, or something was seriously wrong about them, since this entire thing was beginning to feel like a horror movie, my mother absolutely forbid us from even going near them. She put them on a high shelf and sent us to bed. I was so angry. I went to bed hungry and irritable. Only 2 things happened that night that I can recall. My parents slept very lightly, when at all, as you might imagine. They claimed they kept hearing talking outside. My sister woke us all with a blood-curdling scream around 1 a.m. for reasons unknown, as she was usually a very quiet baby. When my parents got up and milled for about an hour trying to get her back to bed, my mom noticed something on the wall as she was walking her around and called my father over. What I would later learn was that the picture hanging to one side of the door that during the daylight seemed to be logs in a recently extinguished fire pit and a tranquil forest scene was by night, unmistakably, burning corpses with a hooded, smoky figure looming over them. We got up the next morning, packed up early, and waited for the lady to get up so we could pay and leave. While my parents were packing the bags, the woman came around back and gave my brother and I small wooden cats carved into the form of napkin holders, each a different color, that she had written little notes on. As my father was paying after loading us into the car, my mom began kicking the gravel around on the drive absent-mindedly. The woman came over to say goodbye and to wave to us with her gaped grin, and my mother noticed that she was trying to discreetly recover the tiles that she was uncovering under the gravel. Before driving off, my mother got back out of the car and uncovered one of the tiles, and she claims it was the same pentagram with Third Reich symbol within it that she had seen a similar version of in the park, prompting her to notice, as we drove away, that the necklace was no longer in her purse. The likelihood of it simply falling out of the purse pocket she had placed it in was, as she put it, quite unlikely. People listening to this story seemed appalled at the fact that I still have that little wooden cat that the nice lady gave me, sitting in my bedroom. I know this all sounds very strange, but I can only assure you that it matches well with my memory of the events, and all of the adults who were there tell the same story, and 2 of them are not known to extrapolate at all. Personally, I'm glad it's just a weird story we look back on with confusion, and that nothing stranger happened that night. Update. According to my mother, whom I spoke to today, it was near Millbrook, and one was a farm, the other was an old mill. I actually found the website for the B&B. It's still running, but with different owners. I don't know that I should post the link, however. They seem like nice people who have improved it quite a lot. Here are the photos of the cat the woman gave me. As a kid, I just thought it was a cool old building with some cats and a nice lady, so I have kept this for over 20 years. About 3 years ago, I was driving to my dad's house from across state in Pennsylvania. He lived far out in the country down a desolate paved road that crossed with an old dirt road, as well as some unused railroad tracks. The entire area was surrounded by deep woods and unused farming fields. There were a couple of dilapidated old houses, an old well, and a few old cemeteries nearby. I arrived at those crossroads I mentioned earlier after being on the road for about 4 hours, and I decided to pull over and relieve myself. I stopped my truck about 60 feet from said crossroad, close to a small farm shed with some old equipment in it. There was a single light bulb on the side of the shed, providing the only source of light in the nearly pitch-black darkness of the night. On the opposite side of the road from the shed was a steep drop-off into the ditch on the other side of some dense woods. As I was peeing in the dark by the shed, I was suddenly overwhelmed by a massive feeling of dread, like someone had just punched me directly in the gut. I had been around these woods all my life, and I used to walk around the area at night as a teenager, and I assure you that I had never felt as scared as I did in that exact moment. I quickly finished up and goaded on my sudden sense of panic. I ran back to my truck, got in, and locked the doors. I flicked the headlights on and cracked the engine so badly that you could hear the gears grinding. But all I cared about was getting out of there. As soon as I began to turn back onto the road from the shoulder, my headlights shone over the ditch and picked something up on the other side of the road. About a foot from the asphalt, my stomach immediately sank again. There was something crawling out of the ditch on all fours. It was hunkered down like an animal, but its body looked almost human. A human that was attempting to mimic a stalking animal. It didn't look hairy, but it was a uniform color. Almost yellow. Not yellow like a cougar or a lion, but a sickly yellow that reminded me of jaundiced skin. Its head was shaped like an oval, but had no hair or ears that I could see. The mouth was very, very wide and looked like a thin straight line that extended all the way across the creature's face. It was very, very slightly upturned at the edges, like a slight smile. His eyes were very small and beady, just like 2 black pinpoints. It had no nose or any facial features aside from the mouth and eyes. Since I was around 7 feet from it, I'm certain it wasn't just a person wearing a mask. Even the body sort of seemed wrong. But I can't pinpoint why I couldn't see feet or hands, since there was about a foot of grass at the edge of the road. Whatever it was, I'd say it was about the size of a 12-year-old. As soon as my lights hit it, I could tell by its movements that it had been in the process of slowly creeping up the ditch to the road. And when my lights hit it, it sort of retracted slightly, like it was surprised that it had been discovered. I didn't stick around long enough to see what was going to go down next. I floored the gas and flew all the way to my dad's house and stayed up the entire night freaked out. The part of the experience that still utterly scares me to this day is that whatever I saw was definitely stalking up that ditch to get me when I had my back turned to it. Otherwise, I can't possibly explain what had triggered those emotions when I stood there in the darkness with my guard completely down. The only thing that came close to that sudden realization of grave danger was when I was nearly struck by a speeding car on a city street many years ago. I don't know what could have happened if I had lingered around for a few minutes longer, but I'd rather not think about it.
My niece got a little doll as a gift last year. It was from a family member who has a not-so-good reputation with us. This person has tried to use local witchcraft stuff towards my family in the past. Not that I believe in it much. But it's still family, so my sister accepted it, and we took the doll home. Everything was fine before in that house. My bedroom is located next to the living room, while the others are a bit farther away, crossing the living room and the hallway. I only come for the holidays, and I had been there for a week. Everything was normal. I get to hear a lot of noise coming from the upper floor. We have a dog there. And from the neighbors, because my room is directly above their backyard. The night we brought the doll, everything was quiet, because it was the day after New Year's. Everybody was sleeping after the celebrations, and I was on my laptop talking to some friends. Suddenly, I hear footsteps right outside my bedroom. It didn't bother me, because it could have been my sister's husband. They were heavy footsteps, like boots or men's shoes. It sounded like they were crossing the hallway, then the living room, and finished on the kitchen. Immediately, I heard the water on the kitchen sink running, and the sound of dishes being washed. It was odd because it was 1:15 a.m., but it could have been someone washing the baby bottles. I kept on listening. After 5 minutes, I heard my niece's playground being dragged from the hallway where it was kept to the living room. It does a very distinctive noise, and I'm 100% sure that was what I heard. The noise kept going for a good 10 minutes or so. I wrote my sister to find out if everything was fine, but got no response. After that, I kept hearing these footsteps. My dog was very nervous and barked at me when I tried to open the door to check out what was happening, so I just stayed in the room. I checked the time at this point. It was 1:43 a.m., and the sounds were still going, until they suddenly stopped. I went to sleep, trying not to think too hard about it. The next morning, my sister calls me on the phone and tells me to get out of my room. I did. I went to the hallway, and my mom, sister, and her husband were all there. My sister asked me if I had put my niece's stroller in front of her bedroom door, and if I had moved the playground station. I said no and told them about all the noises I had heard last night. I thought they weren't going to believe me, but it turns out that when my sister came out of her bedroom in the morning, she found the stroller moved. She put it in the right place and went to go get the baby bottles, then moved back to the room. After that, her husband got out to drink some water and found the stroller again in front of the door. He moved it back to where it was supposed to be, and on his way back, asked my sister why she had put her stroller in front of the bedroom door. They noticed there was something very weird about the situation, saw my text from last night, and decided to call me. We started to freak out a bit, and when I randomly grabbed the doll that was on the stroller, I noticed a strong smell emanating from it, like dry saliva. It was nauseating. It wasn't there the night before, and nobody had touched the thing. It was still in the gift bag. My sister's husband got scared about that fact and decided to throw away the doll. That night, everything was calm again.
Growing up in a working-class Latino family, we didn't have the luxury of taking lavish vacations throughout the year. However, that didn't stop us from exploring the natural wonders of Southern California through camping. At a young age, my sister and I understood the value of camping through our shared respect for Mother Nature. Over time, we mastered surviving in the outdoors, so much so that we desired to explore new campgrounds throughout the state. On one such occasion, a coworker of my father overheard him talking about his summer vacation plans and suggested to him a new campground to check out. To this day, my parents nor I are unable to remember the name of the campsite, yet we all agree that it was somewhere in the hills of San Diego County. My father was excited for the prospect of visiting a new national park and packed up the car for the customary family summer retreat. The drive up to the campsite was long and dangerous. Even though we were driving during the day, The steepness of the mountain, coupled with the numerous blind turns, had everyone sitting on the edge of their seats. Argument soon erupted amongst us, as we didn't find any signs indicating where to go. This was in the age before smartphones and GPS. Eventually, we convinced our father to stop and ask for directions. As the campground came into view, we all let out a collective sigh of relief. We made it. And yet, the place did not look like it was a national park at all. There wasn't a ranger station or a welcome center anywhere in sight. The lake appeared murky like a bog, whereas the campground itself was devoid of life. A proverbial ghost town, with the only inhabitants being us. With our bewilderment aside, we cautiously surveyed the area, finding any clues that will guide us to the keeper of this place. Out in the distance, we saw a crumbling, open sign dangling in the window of a dilapidated diner. Just as the sign implied, we entered the establishment to inquire about the place. Pushing the creaking door open, we were greeted by the owner of the diner, a gaunt-looking man who I would now say was plucked straight out of the movie The Hills Have Eyes. "Well, how can I help y'all folks on this fine day?" My dad replied. "We made reservations to camp here, but I'm not sure if this is the right place." We then handed the man our booking papers for him to inspect. With his bony fingers grasping the pages, he replied, Yeah, you have the right place. I'm the groundskeeper of this here national park. Let me finish some paperwork on my end, and I'll get things ready for you and your family to stay here with us." As he wobbled off to the back of the diner, my sister and I retreated to the safety of our car. Although we were children at the time, we both felt a sense of unease, even dread at the thought of spending the night here. Despite our worries, our parents reassured us that the vacation had only just begun, albeit with a few bumps along the way. As we neared the site, all of our concerns were tossed out the window, as it was time to transform this empty lot into our secure encampment. The rest of the day came and went, as our campsite was beginning to take shape. The sounds of our radio, along with the rhythmic banging of the hammer, were the only echoes greeting us as the sun began to set. This detail stood out to me, due to the fact it was early July here in Southern California, and there are always people camping around this time. In either case, we all just brushed it aside and thought that more people would arrive by tomorrow. And they did. On the following day of the trip, my father went fishing at the lake. While he was off on his own adventure, my sister and I decided that it was time to have one of our own. Recruiting the aid of our mother, we set out to explore the campgrounds. To our surprise and elation, we discovered that this campground had its own public swimming pool. With our minds made up, the three of us got into our bathing suits, slathered on the sunscreen, and made our way to the pool. Soon my sister and I were splashing around in the water without a care in the world, until I noticed 3 suspicious men, dressed entirely in black. They came and sat at one of the chairs at the opposite end of the pool from where our mother was watching us. At first, I thought the men were new campers that had recently arrived at the grounds to examine the swimming pool, but to my dismay, the men just huddled around each other and whispered incomprehensible things while staring intently at the two of us. My mother's instincts caught on to the predatory behavior, and she decided to cut our excursion to the swimming pool short. When my father arrived from the lake, he said he was unable to catch any fish, and that the fish he did find were all belly up dead in the water. My mother then informed my father of the 3 suspicious-looking men eyeing my sister and I at the pool. This infuriated him. My father, brandishing his machete, stormed out in search of the group of men, ostensibly to talk some sense into them. Some time passed, and my father arrived back at the campsite, dismayed that he did not find the men, only a mother and her 2 little boys. This point may sound insignificant at first, but it will become important later in the story. As night fell, my sister and I were preparing to go to sleep. when we were suddenly jolted awake by the pleading screams of a woman. Her pleas were joined by the cries of 2 young children and various male voices demanding their silence. My father recognized the woman's voice as the mother he saw earlier in the day camping alone with her 2 kids. My father, who is a former Marine, loaded his rifle and concealed his hunting knife. He then proceeded to tell my mother to take care of us while handing her a loaded gun. I then saw my father head out towards the campsite where the single mother and her children were staying. My sister and I were petrified when we noticed the terror-stricken look on our mother's face. As the yelling escalated, 2 thunderous bangs from the rifle rang out. Which put an end to the chaos. Seconds later, we heard the crackling branches closing in, as someone moved quickly towards us. My mother, with eyes wide and knuckles clenched, aimed into the darkness, ready to protect us at all costs. To our relief, my father emerged from the shadows with a fearful mother and her 2 sobbing children. My father then claimed that he scared off the men who were harassing us at the pool and will be helping the mother pack her things to leave. To ensure that they made their way down the mountain safely, my father offered to follow her in our car until she got to the main highway. In a moment of reprieve, the woman held her children tight. We all assured her that their safety was of the utmost importance, and knowing my father, any form of aggression needs to be handled quickly. With pleasantries aside, my father departed yet again to help the mother pack up her campsite and leave this backwater excuse for a national park. The few rays of sunlight that streamed into our tent signaled the start of a new day, since our father had left to escort the small family from the imminent danger. With a look of apprehension on my mother's face, my sister and I started to pack up camp, knowing all too well that we did not want to risk our lives spending another night at this place. I was making my way to the bathrooms when my eye caught the glimpse of our car slowly making its way back to camp. I ran back to tell my mother and sister, who noticed the car as well, and soon the bloodshot eyes of my father behind the wheel came into view. As he exited the car, he informed us that the mother and her children made it safely to the highway. This was then followed by a long pause, with my father saying, "Now let's get the hell out of here ourselves." With that, we all took our positions and packed up the rest of our camping gear. Before leaving this godforsaken place, my father informed the owner of the diner about what happened last night and about the 3 suspicious-looking men. The only thing that the emaciated-looking man said was, "Well, it's a damn shame that you and your family can't stay here a little longer." We then hightailed it out of there like bats out of hell, vowing never to return. Ever since this harrowing experience, my family and I have been unable to get my sister to go camping again. As time went on, I decided to ask my father where he had heard about that awful place, to which he added a new detail not previously disclosed. He mentioned that upon returning to work, he wanted to confront his coworker about the horrible camping recommendation he gave. When he tried to locate him, another coworker stated that the same man quit a couple of days before my father was going to return from vacation. My father was left speechless and confused upon hearing this. Was the man somehow connected to those 3 men? If so, what were their motives for harassing a family out in the middle of nowhere? The answers to these questions we will never know, but what I do know is this. If my father did not intervene on that fateful night, that single mother and her kids would have met a fate far worse than a failed camping trip.
Timothy applied glue to his forehead and a little under his chin in order to secure his mask. He'd be a monster, a hideous troll, hideous enough to conceal his real identity. He'd been struck with morphia, a rare condition which, with time, mutates skin and in severe cases, even bone. He was now 13 and the disease made him look like a monster. worse than the mask that he would hide behind. He watched himself in the bathroom mirror as he carefully applied the fake green hair, then the mask. He'd worn the mask each Halloween for the last 3 years, and was looking forward to again being a regular kid for that one night. This was the only time he could disguise himself. The other kids couldn't tell that there was anything abnormal or disgusting under the mask. For this one night, he could avoid their frightened looks and cruel laughter. So, Timothy went out, on his own, even though his mother would not have wanted it. It was a cool night in Haleyville. Maple leaves had turned the fiery crimson yellow of Indian summer. It had rained earlier that day, sticking wet, multicolored leaves to the sidewalk. At dusk, carefree goons and goblins splashed through puddles of idle rainwater, running to ring doorbells. They zeroed in on houses decorated with lighted styrofoam gravestones or plastic black cats. These promised to deliver goodies after yelling, "Trick or treat!" Timothy the Monster followed 3 or 4 smaller kids to a house that featured flashing lightning and a cackling witch on the porch. As he cautiously stepped up to the door, a hobo kid ran right into him, almost knocking him over. They both tried for the bell, but the monster won out. As the door opened, they yelled, "Trick or treat! Trick or treat!" Only 1 candy each was carefully dropped into their bags. A little dismayed, they walked back to the sidewalk together. Hobo exclaimed, "I like it better when they let you pick the ones you want, don't you?" "There were some Snickers in there. I guess they're saving those for someone else," said Monster. Hobo suddenly recalled, "Hey, I know a house where they got candy apples." "Let's go," said Monster. Hobo paused. "Hey, what's your name anyway?" Timothy sighed. "Monster. No, your real name, Dodo." "My friends call me Tim." He really hadn't had any friends, but it sounded good to say it that way. "My name's Sean. I live on Baker. Hey, let's get going before all the candy apples are gone." "Okay," replied Monster, and together they ran down the darkening street. Before they got to the Apple House, they bumped into Sean's other friends. There was Bobby as a scruffy Davy Crockett, Arnold was Wolfman, and Superman, whose real name was Jimmy, Lance dressed as Dracula. "This is my new friend Tim," said Hobo. "But you can call him Monster. We're going to get some candy apples. Want to come?" "Just been there. They're all out," Wolfman disappointingly reported. Dracula came running up to the boys, sweaty and out of breath. "There was this car full of teenagers. I threw an egg and it splattered all over the windshield." Suddenly came the sound of screeching tires as the car whipped around the corner. "Oh shit, here they come!" The blue car screeched to a stop. All 4 doors burst open. 4 seniors, some wearing leather jackets, rushed towards the boys. The superheroes scattered. They caught Davy Crockett by the arm and waved a tire iron in his face, threatening to brain whoever threw the egg. Davy cleverly let a fresh one that he was holding behind his back slip from his hand, where it luckily fell into a low hedge. As the teenagers were sure they had thoroughly intimidated the younger boys, the driver yelled from the car, "Hey guys, let's go! Leave these little pucks alone!" And just as fast as it had come, the blue hot rod burned rubber and was gone. "That was close," whispered a relieved Superman. Then came the 3rd degree. Dracula started asking Monster some uncomfortable questions. "So what school you go to? What grade you in? Where do you live?" Then Monster made an unforced error. "Maple Street. I live on Maple Street. Why?" Wolfman questioned. "Is that where that really creepy guy lives? On Maple? My sister said she saw him once in his backyard. Scared her stiff. She ran all the way home. It was a real monster, she said." Dracula, seeing an opportunity for more mischief, retorted, "Hey guys, let's go over to the monster house and egg it." Hobo intuitively shook his head. "No, I don't think that's a good idea." "What, little Hobo scared?" taunted Wolfman. Dracula joined in. "It's Halloween, man. We got some treats. Let's do some tricks." Yeah, let's go. They agreed. That is, except Hobo and Monster. Outvoted, they followed along as they all walked toward the monster house. They only had a short way to go, just around the corner to Elm, then Maple. There were no street lamps on the block. Except for the pale amber light of a half moon and a lone jack-o'-lantern on the porch, the monster house was eerily dark. The superheroes silently stood there for a moment. "Is that it?" Superman whispered. Although the house itself was just about the same as all the other houses on the block, Davy Crockett exclaimed, "Looks kinda creepy, doesn't it? Are you sure that's where the monster lives? Dracula questioned. Wolfman eagerly bellowed. Where's the eggs? Hobo tried to stop it before it started. We might get in trouble, he hesitated. Dracula sarcastically chided. We might get in trouble! We might get in trouble! Then he threw the first egg, hitting the front door. Cool! Exclaimed Superman. Give me one! On that dark Halloween night, there was suddenly the wild frenzy of flying eggs, then the stomping of the jack-o'-lantern. Timothy saw the maddened glee in their eyes as they chanted. Monster! 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 Stop! He cried out. Stop it! He pushed Dracula. Dracula pushed back. They tussled to the ground, punching, kicking, and yelling. Then the unthinkable happened. Timothy's mask came off. In the dim light, his face looked even worse than it really was. There was a collective gasp at the monster he'd been hiding all along. Stepping back in shock and disgust, someone called out, Oh my God, it's the monster! Their collective jaws dropped. Their eyes now were wide open in shock. Hobo knelt to the ground by the friendly monster's side, who was by then completely humiliated. That's enough, demanded Hobo. Leave him alone. Over with the initial scare, Davy Crockett giggled. Everyone except Hobo was uncontrollably laughing at the hideous monster that just moments before had been a regular kid. Suddenly, lights went on in the house. Timothy's mother opened the front door. Wolfman shouted, Let's get out of here! And the giggling gang quickly escaped around the corner. That Halloween had turned into Timothy's worst nightmare. Once again, he'd been laughed at and humiliated. But out of that humiliation, he found a friend. He remembered what his mother had told him. You'll know who your true friends are, especially in your darkest hour. Hobo Sean finally asked, So will you ever get better? Timothy explained what morphia was and that within a few years it was expected to run its course and he'd be just fine. As they grew up together, where one was, so was the other. They were college roommates, best man at each other's weddings, and lifelong friends. Over the years, they shared countless laughs remembering the scared looks on those boys' faces that Halloween. Sean became a doctor of rare diseases. Ironically, Timothy became a writer of horror novels. It's been over 40 years. They both have wonderful lives. That was the night Timothy found his best friend. It happened just that way. I know. I was Monster.
I worked as a flight attendant for a few years when I decided to take an extended sabbatical from college. There were a handful of let's not meet situations that I encountered, but one in particular still makes my skin crawl more than any other. I was born and raised in Texas, but had moved to New York when I was 21, so when I found out at the beginning of a week-long trip that I'd have a couple of overnights in Austin, I was super excited to go to my home state for a few days. My brother lived just north of the city, and we planned to hang out and go to dinner the night I arrived when he got off work. The following day, we were going to meet up with our dad, who only lived about an hour away. So I get to the hotel downtown. The crew and I check in, and then we each head off to our own rooms. A short elevator ride and I get to mine, where not even 5 minutes later, there's a loud, hard knock on the door. It was only around 1 or 2 p.m., and I hadn't called either my dad or brother to let them know I was in town yet. They definitely wouldn't know what my room was. I assumed it was maybe one of my crewmates, so I headed over to the door. Before even making it to the door, however, a loud male voice boomed on the other side. The front desk sent me about the bathroom problem you called in, before he tried to open the door. Unlock the door and open up, miss. I need in now. I froze in my tracks. I hadn't even been in the bathroom yet, let alone called anything to the front desk. I'm a fairly petite chick, and while I take no shit from anyone despite my size, I still err on the side of caution. Slowly inching toward the door, I look out of my peephole. All I could tell was that the man on the other side was at least 6 foot tall, easily over double my height. No way in hell I was going to unlock the door. I responded to the man, telling him that he must have had the wrong room. He continued to pound away while constantly turning the handle, telling me that he needed in, and he was getting in one way or another. I panicked, but thankfully I had the sense to grab the phone and call the front desk. The concierge confirmed that they had neither sent anyone up to my room, nor had they received a call about the bathroom. The entire time, this fucking guy was still determined to get into my room, pounding and yelling. Luckily for me, the front desk had dispatched security to my floor right away. When the security officers step off the elevator a few seconds later, I can hear them in the hall approach and ask the man who he was, what he was doing, and telling him he needed to leave the hotel. He immediately got hostile, and the front desk clerk I'm still on the phone with tells me the police had been called and were on their way. In the meantime, I was trapped in my room, scared shitless. Long story short, the cops show up pretty quickly and arrested the guy for trespassing and criminal menacing or some shit. I later found out that the man was wanted in connection to a string of break-ins and violent sexual assaults in Austin. He had seen and stalked me from the minute I entered the hotel lobby. Apparently, I was exactly his type of victim. Nothing else happened after that, but it still rattled the fuck out of me for the rest of my stay in this hotel.